Good morning to our listeners on Parliament Radio 105.5 FM, our viewers on the Parliament channel, and to those of you joining us via the World Wide Web on the Parliament's website, www.ttparliament.org. It is 9:59 a.m. We are just 1 minute away from the start of today's sitting of the House of Representatives. At today's sitting, the budget debate for fiscal 2016 is expected to begin, led by the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Kamla Persad-Bissessar. We expect that we shall have some 4 days of debate. At the last sitting, the Leader of the House indicating that there is likely to be a sitting tomorrow. Let's go over to the chamber.
Honourable Speaker,
we welcome you to the third sitting of the House in the first session of the 11th Parliament that takes place on Friday, October 9th, 2016.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the Creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this House here, assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker, public business, government business, bills. Bills, second reading.
Honourable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. The question is that a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the financial year ending on the 30th day of September 2016 be now read a second time. I now call on the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I take this opportunity to thank God and the over 341,000 persons, representing 31% of the electorate, who made it possible for us to take our seats on this side of this Honourable House by voting for us, thereby placing us at this time, subject to any court rulings, just 3 seats away from government. Again, to them all, I say thank you, as I give them and the people of Trinidad and Tobago the assurance that we on this side of the House fully intend to carry out our oath of office and to discharge our responsibilities thereunder as a loyal opposition of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Whilst the Honourable Minister of Finance boasted that the people of Trinidad and Tobago placed their confidence in his party, I say respectfully that perhaps he needs to remind himself, lest he grows more arrogant, that they received the support of only 34% of the electorate, which means that 66, 2/3 of the electorate did not support them. In other words, his government is a minority one, having garnered, Madam Speaker.
Order, please.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In other words, Madam Speaker, out of the electorate, 34% supported their party, and yes, 31% supported us. But they received, as I say, just about 1/3 of the votes of the electorate. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I acknowledge the maiden contribution of the Honourable Minister of Finance, I cannot help but think, as I'm sure did many others, that he had then a golden opportunity to walk the talk, to demonstrate the commitment to the talk that his party and government have been propagating, and which they emblazoned on the budget documents, namely, let us do this together. Alas, he squandered that opportunity when he chose instead at the outset, and some may say indeed at the onslaught, even before he thanked God and the Honourable Prime Minister for the honour to present his first budget, he did in effect insult and label the more than 720,000 persons, 2/3 of the electorate who did not vote for his party, as being guilty of all manner of malfeasance, including but not limited to greed, arrogance, corruption, betrayal, deception, nepotism, and cronyism. On another day, Madam Speaker, we can speak to those allegations and as to where guilt may lie. On another day, we can inquire into whether the member may have violated the standing orders whilst their good self is engaged busily in quelling excessive cross-talk. On another day, we can talk about whether it is betrayal to ask everyone to do this together and then alienate so many by branding them guilty of malfeasance. On another day, Madam Deputy Speaker, we can ask whether it is a betrayal when an assurance is given that there will be no job losses, yet every day we read about more and more job losses. The Sunday Express of October 4, 2015, with the headline, "Contract Workers Feeling Betrayed," and I quote, "I voted for the People's National Movement, but right now I feel like I wasted my vote." This was a statement by a contract worker at the Ministry of Agriculture, Lands and Fisheries in St. Clair to the Sunday Express on Friday, as she lamented the current climate at the ministry following a number of employees being sent home and not having their contracts renewed. Madam Speaker, it is not only at that ministry that there is job loss. It is across the board in ministries and state companies. Also, Madam Speaker, on another day, we can ask whether it is cronyism when dynasties are being created, so that a father holding office will have to appear before a daughter-in-law who holds high office and a brother appointed as a new heart. We'll have to ask whether it is nepotism or cronyism when a campaign manager of a very high official is appointed as chairman of a very crucial state board. And we'll also have to ask if there's cronyism when a childhood friend of a high official is appointed to hold a very powerful office in the government. Madam Speaker, these and many more instances of apparent cronyism and nepotism we can inquire into on another day. Today I want to talk a bit about deception. Indeed, immediately following the budget statement, we did indicate that there are many deceptive elements within the budget, and today I want to spend some time talking about those. I'm sure the members on the other side will sing the praises of whatever is contained in the budget, and so I will take this opportunity to point out some of the grey areas that we have discovered in the budget. It is said that context gives meaning to things. Otherwise, all nouns are just names for the purpose of identification, and all numbers are just representation of quantities. And so the framing of context distinguishes fact from fiction, information from misinformation, truth from propaganda, truthfulness from deceit or deception. And so, for example, if someone says that they inherited $1 million, it sounds like a lot of money. But if that same person says that he inherited $1 million together with $2 million in debt, then the picture changes entirely in that context. And so if a critic of the person who inherits the $1 million says about the inheritor that he got $1 million and in a quick time he spent out the money and got himself in $1 million of debt on top of that. Yes. And the critic describes him as a profligate spender. Yes. Then, on the face of it, it seems credible and reasonable. So when context is provided and it becomes clear that the inherited windfall could only pay half of the inherited debt, then the picture changes altogether, and sympathy then seems appropriate for the inheritor who finds himself in that situation. Of course, vice versa, the converse position would also hold. And so it is with the presentation of this 2015 budget by the Honourable Minister of Finance, who, beginning his presentation, accused the previous government of spending too much and spending badly in 2015, running up an overdraft, leaving a debt in terms of payment for public servants, and leaving a deficit in excess of the projected deficit for 2015. And so, with your leave, Madam Speaker, I will attempt to put these things into context. Firstly, we must acknowledge that there are no actual numbers for 2015, only estimates and projections. So the numbers presented in these estimates are not actual numbers and therefore are subject to change when the actual numbers come in. The financial year would have closed on September 30. The budget was prepared for presentation on October 5th. The half-yearly report until June 2015 would have been presented some days before the reading of the budget on October 5th. The review of the economy would have been prepared before October, perhaps at the end of September. And so most of their real figures would have been up to about June 2015, and figures for 2015 after June would have been in the realm of estimates or projections, not actual. And indeed, all the budget documents, Madam Speaker, point to estimates, and therefore within those you will see under the 2015 allocations that they are listed as revised estimates for 2015. And indeed, on the other side, revised estimates for 2016. So let us get that straight from the start. The numbers are not the actual numbers of either revenue or expenditure, but indeed estimates of same. The Minister of Finance, as some may think, may have been precipitous in the use of figures to make the last government look so bad that much of what he says by way of insinuation, inference and criticism has to be taken for what it is, as speculation. I noticed that in the painting of the TT economy as being in dire straits did not prevent the Honourable Minister from presenting a $63 billion budget. It did not hinder him from announcing several high-cost projects, and the criticisms of spending by the People's Partnership government was perhaps merely used as a justification for bringing back the dreaded property tax, for imposing taxes on business and the general population under the guise of reducing VAT, and did not at all impede them from pursuing the rapid rail. And so we reach to where we are in terms of the how did we spend money under the partnership government. Thank you. I was making the point, it did not stop them from pursuing the rapid rail, on which they had already spent $500 million for a feasibility study already in the pre-2010 under the PNM administration. So I turn now, Madam Speaker, to expenditure under the partnership government, because these matters were raised by the Honourable Minister of Finance in his budget statement. And I asked the question, which I will attempt to answer: how did we as a government spend money during our 5-year term? The propaganda is that we wasted money and that we were corrupt, but let us look at the facts and the context. Between 2010 and 2015, we spent approximately $290 billion, a far cry from the campaign rhetoric of $400 billion. Most of that money, it is important to note, was spent on recurrent expenditure. And what is recurrent expenditure? Recurrent expenditure is for wages and salaries, for goods and services, for interest payments for both domestic and foreign loans, and also for subsidies and transfers. Indeed, when all is said and done, less than 50 billion was spent on capital expenditure, which addressed the matter of the infrastructure deficit in the country. And so when we talk numbers, the financial deficit is indeed important, but when we focus on development, then the infrastructure deficit becomes important. And the only way a government can deal with an infrastructure deficit is to spend money. You cannot build a highway to Point 14, or build a Valencia bypass, or build an interchange, or to dual the Diego Martin Highway, build schools and hospitals and so on, without spending money. You cannot build 100 plus schools without spending money. You cannot build hospitals and health centers and police stations and secondary roads, agricultural roads, drains, bridges, fix landslips without spending money. And you can today travel the country and see what we spent the money on. It is all identifiable. And the people, the citizens, the taxpayers of this country, those who voted for us, those who did not vote for us, and those who did not vote at all, they can identify these as you travel the length and breadth of the country. Of the $290 billion we spent during our tenure, as I said, less than 50 billion, or 1/6, was spent on capital expenditure. And 240 billion was spent on wages and salaries, goods and services, subsidies, transfers, and loan repayments. And so you may say, wages and salaries are too high. But how do you reduce it? Do you suppress wages? Do you cut wages? Do you send people home? I know the new government has no problem with putting people on the breadline and send them home, but the People's Partnership chose not to do that. And I know that the Honourable Minister of Finance did not conceal the fact that he was, in local parlance, vexed because we had concluded negotiations with public servants and the protective services, and that he has a bill of $5 billion to pay. Today, Madam Deputy Speaker, I make no apology for giving workers and their families better salaries and wages. Also in his budget presentation, the Minister spoke more than once about fiscal discipline. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are some who may have the view that this is a newfound discovery for members on the other side. After all, what is the history of the growth of budgetary expenditure in our country? The records are there, and you can see them throughout all budget documents, which we must thank the Parliament staff for placing everything on the website, so it is very easy to sit at your computer and research budget documents way back into the past. And so we can find, for example, the issue matters to deal with the issue of the fiscal discipline. In the year 2000, those on their side were in charge of the government, as they are now. Central government expenditure in 2000 was 10.99 billion TT dollars. By 2005, rising every year, it rose to 22.4 billion, and by 2009, it reached $36.7 billion. The average annual increase of expenditure then, under their administration, was 14.53%. And yes, expenditure did grow under the partnership government, but it grew at about 7.6% annually. That is about half the rate that it did under the PNM between 2000 and 2009. Now, why is this important to note? You see, when the People's Partnership government came into office in 2010, we inherited a deficit of over $6 billion. In 2010, a deficit, I think, was $6.8 billion. There was a decline in growth in 2009, which had been about minus 4.4%. Inflation was 10.5%. Unemployment, 6%. And of course, the number of murders at an all-time high, and serious crimes also at an all-time high. We could not, on humanitarian grounds then, consider a cut in expenditure because we would have had to begin with subsidies and transfers. We could not do that in the context of a global financial crisis and severe economic contraction here at home. Professor James Dusenberry, an economist, once explained the problem of cutting expenditure. I quote, he said, It is harder, he said, for a family to reduce its expenditure from a higher level than for a family to refrain from making high expenditures in the first place. And so when the minister speaks about expenditure, I have taken a moment to place it into context of what we inherited then and what we did. And now the Minister of Finance is talking about a deficit. As I said, when we came into office in 2010, they handed us a deficit of $6.8 billion. How easily you forget. Did we raise taxes? No, we did not. Did we send people home? No, we did not. Did we punish people? No, we did not. Did we cut salaries? No, we did not. Instead, we put people to work. We reduced the unemployment rate down, 2015 numbers, 3.7%. We gave water to the population. I think Ganga is about 75% from 17%. When we came into office in 2010, 17%. And then we were able to have water for the population of about 70. Thank you, Madam.
I just want to remind you, honorable members, we have some pages here who are youth parliamentarians. So I'd like us to observe the decorum of the House so that we can train them properly. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Did we cut salaries? No, we did not. So I was talking about water from 17% of the population receiving water, a reliable supply, to 75%. We fixed roads. We fixed roads. We improved drainage. We expanded education, surpassing our own target for tertiary education participation. Madam Deputy Speaker, they will have their turn, please. And I know you warned us last week, Monday, about excessive crosstalk.
53.
And so,
members, I would like to hear the contribution of the Honorable Leader of the Opposition, and I'm sure we would all like to hear also. Could you kindly proceed?
thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I said, we expanded education opportunities. Indeed, we surpassed our own target for tertiary education, bringing participation to about 65%. We became one of the first countries in the world to have free preschool education. We expanded GATE. We outfitted a teaching hospital. We also constructed a south campus of UWI. May I just take a moment? I know Mr. Karim, MP Karim for Chaguanas East may speak a little more on this, but there seems to be a misconception that the South Campus is only for a law faculty. That is not true. It is an extension of the St. Augustine campus, and there are other faculties that will be incorporated in that campus. So other faculties, of course, and indeed that it is not a standalone law faculty, but will be part of the St. Augustine Law Faculty. So a lot of that misconception has put some fear in the hearts of some persons and may give other persons an excuse to shut it down. I trust they will not do to that campus what they did to the Beach High School. Refused to open for 14 years, Madam Speaker. And so I say, when the Honourable Minister of Finance spoke about expenditure, I'm relating these things so that you can see and know where the expenditure went. And so we gave citizens every opportunity to improve your lives. Madam Speaker, instead, what have we got now? And can I get 10? Yeah, thank you. What we get now is a budget, which is a half budget, which costs the country $63 billion, with a deficit, in your own words, of $21 billion, and in the same breath that you're talking about fiscal discipline. You then tell us that the real budget will come in March next year, with the help of the IMF. And so, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, hold your breath. as you wait to exhale when the real budget comes down later. Let me summarize by saying that the 2015 numbers are debatable, and we'll only know the real numbers some months from now. Secondly, I want to make it clear that we did not engage in any profligate spending over the 5-year period, and I also want to emphasize that monies expended can be accounted for, and that the work of the PP government over the last 5 years is tangible and visible to everyone. I want to emphasize that sizable budgets for a country of our size did not begin with the partnership government, and the period 2000 to 2009 saw a rapid 14% plus annual escalation of government expenditure. Further, in our time in government, expenditure grew at half the rate in comparison to that. In our time, we managed the economy. Expenditure grew at half the rate in comparison to the previous administration. We managed the economy to single-digit inflation, almost full employment, and more disposable income in the pockets of everyone. As I said before, we did all that without raising a single tax. We brought serious crime down, we reduced the number of murders and gang violence, and we gave opportunities to everyone without discrimination. Madam Speaker, it is true we made mistakes in government and in the campaign, and we paid the electoral price for that. But I think, in all honesty, from an objective observer, that we governed well, we governed fairly, we governed with the welfare of the ordinary citizen in mind, as a people-centered government with people-centered policies and initiatives. So let me get to some of the misinformation in these budget documents. I speak about a deficit. The deficit at the end of June 2015 was $1 billion based on verified numbers. Indeed, there is a memo from the Director of Budgets, which the former Minister of Finance shared a copy with us, which shows that the verified numbers, end of June 2015, was $1 billion. And so it is difficult to see how $1 billion deficit in June, end of June, turned into a $7 billion deficit between June and September. Now, this can happen if the Minister of Finance did one of two things. One, if he failed to collect the $1.5 billion from the Phoenix Park IPO, the $3.8 billion capital repayment from TGU, the $500 million dividend from NGC, the partial repayment by CLICO relating to government's financial support before September 30, and I know that the Honourable Minister of Finance was briefed by the former Minister of Finance about these pending cash flows and the importance of acting on them. Madam Speaker, note also that these are the same payments the Honourable Minister referred to at pages 59 and 60 of his budget statement as revenue mobilization measures. Again, we call upon the Honourable Minister of Finance to, in his winding up, to provide information to show us how the $1 billion at the end of June deficit jumped into $7 billion by the end of September. And this could have happened because misguided assumptions about income and expenditure projections may have been made. So I hope that sincerely the Minister is not playing politics with the numbers, because given the impression that the deficit is larger than it actually is, could have a very negative impact on the way the rated agencies view our country. And I would trust that his sense of nationalism is stronger than his partisanship as we await his explanations in the winding up. Another issue raised by the Minister of Finance was the issue of the depleted treasury. First of all, any government has to make a choice between using cash or borrowing, just like any business or any household would do. The Minister of Finance under the partnership government chose a combination of cash balances and loans. And do not forget for a minute the debts from contractors that was left to us, which we had to verify and pay over time. And now the Honourable Minister of Finance is angry about outstanding payments to public servants, which is much smaller the debt to contractors than they had left us. And they also conveniently forgot that we had to find $20 billion to fund the CLICO fiasco. So I'm saying 2010, we inherited a deficit of $6.8 billion. We inherited very weak macroeconomic fundamentals. We inherited the CLICO fiasco, the debts to contractors, and so on. All of this, Madam Deputy Speaker. And so we also had to settle wage negotiations, some of them from 2008, which they had left us. And indeed, I think it's about 130 wage negotiations settled in the 5-year period. So what happened then was that these obligations that we inherited, left at our feet, were multiple times in excess of what actually existed in the Treasury at that time. In excess of what was in the Treasury. And some may legitimately ask, well, why didn't you all borrow instead? As I said, a choice had to be made. And that choice was made by having a combination of available cash as well as taking loans, borrowings. We moved to the issue that the Honourable Minister raised about the debt, the $5 billion debt. What about the issue of a $5 billion debt left by us to pay the public servants? First of all, we would be very happy if the Minister in his winding up would give us the details as to how the sum of $5 billion was arrived at. And even if that is the figure, why the fuss about a duly negotiated wage increase for workers in the public service? And you know, I recall that many unions were really very, very anxious to have their wage negotiations settled before the elections because they feared what would come should the government change, and it would seem rightly so when we see the annoyance with which the minister exhibited in talking about this $5 billion debt for paying public servants. I do not understand the annoyance, but the Minister of Finance was disingenuous to suggest that this government will have to find $5 billion in the new fiscal year to pay public servants. Madam Speaker, again I ask for these numbers, because teachers were paid their monies at the end of June. Partial payment was made to public servants in August, and arrangements were made to pay most of the remainder due to them by the end of September. A payment of $3.8 billion due from TGO, which I mentioned before, and which the Minister mentions in his budget statement at page 59, was arranged to honor timetable of payments, and indeed all those, what the Minister called revenue mobilizing measures at page 59 of the budget statement, were within that timetable to meet those obligations for the increased $5 billion in salaries and wages. And the Minister of Finance was advised of this by the former Minister of Finance in a meeting that was requested by the present Minister of Finance. So if the September payments were made, then the only outstanding payments would be the payment to the protective services, and I'll come back to those, the personal expenditure, salaries and wages to the protective services in a moment, which comes under the heading of the Ministry of National Security. So these would have to be paid, which for cash flow management, the former Minister of Finance had advised the payment would be made in the new fiscal year because of cash flow management purposes. So it is not accurate to portray the previous government as being irresponsible for settling wages and salaries of workers. Not only did we manage things to ensure the obligations would be met, but the former minister had put a timetable in place for meeting those obligations. Madam Speaker, I turn now to strong macroeconomic fundamentals. We have left to the government several very strong fundamentals, indicators. As I said, unemployment down to 3.7. The Heritage and Stabilization Fund stands now at US $5.7 billion. And Madam Speaker, in the 5 years, and even when the prices of the oil and gas fell from January or the start of fiscal 2015, at no time did the partnership government raid the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So we've led a very strong fund, US $5.7 billion. Our gross reserves stands at US $10.39 billion, which gives us 11.5 months import cover. And indeed, in their own budget documents, in their budget statement, review of the economy, page 20, the gross reserves are given are spoken about in very glowing terms, and I quote, "Gross official reserves continue to exceed conventional benchmarks of reserve adequacy." So we left you with a very healthy reserve position. And indeed, of course, headline inflation down to 5.6. Oh yes, well, I reminded, which was at 10% when we took office in 2010. Madam Speaker, I turn now to the energy sector. We are an energy-based economy. There is no hiding from it. Yes, we need to diversify and take all our eggs out of the energy basket and go into other areas. But again, in the review of the economy, we would have seen that the non-energy sector has grown and is projected to continue to grow. This is because of the initiatives that we would have employed in the last 5 years. But on the energy sector, energy policy really occupied a very minuscule part of the budget statement of the Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker, we know that demand for energy is a function of the health of the global economy. A few days ago, the IMF forecasted that the world economy will grow by 3.1% in 2015 compared to 3.4% projection for 2014. The increase in shale oil production in the US and increase in oil production in Saudi Arabia to its highest levels ever, coupled with news of economic deceleration in China, all mean that the outlook for oil and gas prices continue to be very weak. In his contribution on the energy sector, the Minister of Finance spoke in vague and elusive terms of being guided by, and I quote, being guided by a framework of general principles, and about stakeholder consultation, and about commencing discussions with stakeholders on the adoption of appropriate strategies. I wish to sound a word of caution, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm sorry. It comes from, through from pre-September. That the energy sector players are looking on at our statements here. These international players do not like uncertainty and indecision. As a result of the sheer size of the investment they undertake, they demand certainty and direction. So that what is said here ripples back to Houston, to Calgary, to London, and therefore impact on investment decisions being made in those places. So, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance told us that oil production had fallen from approximately 100 barrels per day in 2010 to 80,000 barrels per day in 2015. What was not said, and this is why I say again that context is everything, what was not said is when did that decline start and what happened as a result of the decline. In 2005, oil production was 144,425 barrels per day. By 2010, that had declined to 98,179 barrels per day, or a 32% decline from 2005 to 2010. And do you know who was in government then, Madam Deputy Speaker? Where there were these dramatically falling... Madam Speaker, my apologies, Madam Speaker, who was in government during that period of dramatically falling oil production? The very members who are now in government. And so the decline of oil production did not start in 2010, as the Minister of Finance may want us to believe. In their last incarnation in government, from 2002 to 2010, their focus was on natural gas and not on oil. In that period, they ran down Trinma. In 2005, Trinma's production was 33,000 barrels per day. By 2010, it collapsed to 21 barrels per day. Further evidence of the neglect is the fact that in 2009 and 10, there was no drilling in Trinma. And this is why the PNM has no moral authority, in my respectful view, to speak about decline in oil. The focus in Prt1 during their last term was the gas to liquids and the liquids project and the gasoline optimization program, both of which led Prt1 into the valley of debt. The consequence of the gas optimization program and the gas to liquids projects was 2 bonds indebted the company to a massive 10.8 billion. This contributed to taking Petrosin debt from 3.3 billion in 2002 to TT 12.4 billion in 2010. This situation and the servicing of these bonds severely constrained Petrotrin's cash position from 2010 to 2015. To compound matters, the GTL project ended up as a massive failure that, Madam Deputy Speaker, I mean, this incessant crosstalk. Madam Speaker, Madam Speaker.
You're sticking them in. What behavior is that? Sticking them.
Members, could we have some order and allow the presentation to continue with some measure of attention, please?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. These 2 projects, Madam Speaker, burnt a TT $3 billion hole into Petrotrin's books, and the GOP project suffered alarming cost overruns. And that is the history of the management of Petrotrin in between 2009 and 2010. And yet we have a minister now threatening the management of Petrotrin that their days are numbered. Little did the employees of Petrotrin know their days were numbered from the day that they returned into office to complete the destruction of a company they were prevented from completing 5 years ago, Madam Speaker. And so we wait to see in the minister's revenue mobilizing initiatives whether Petrotrin would fall on the block on the sale of assets. And we would ask him to indicate whether Petrotrin is on the books for sale of assets for revenue mobilization purposes. So what is the solution? Yes, there's been a decline in the production, started way back when, continued because matters take time to come on stream, and I'll talk of some of the things that were done to bring back increases in the production. What is the solution? The experts of the oil industry have said that we need more of the lease operator, farm out type operations. These companies are small and nimble, and they have a much lower lifting cost than Petrotrin. The opposition would like the Minister of Finance or the Minister of Energy to say what is their position on the lease operator farm out program and whether it be utilized to increase production in the oil sector. Further, I ask that question because a major partner of the administration, the OWTU, whose president has openly stated he is against the lease operator farm out program, who has so far remained strangely silent. So we would like to get the minister's take, either energy and or finance. Madam Speaker, in October 2014, when the partnership was in government, we awarded some 64,000 hectares of land for the purpose of exploration to 3 companies. This was the first dedicated land-based bid round in 15 years. Work on these 3 blocks will commence in 2016, and we expect that as a consequence of this work, these 3 companies will make discoveries of oil on land. These 3 land-based blocks, as well as the expanded lease operator program, will bear fruit in the coming years, assuming, of course, that the government does not further sabotage the viability of these projects and the life of the company. I turn now to natural gas, Madam Speaker. On the issue of natural gas production, from late 2010, the main producers of natural gas in our country began to experience supply issues. These continue to the present day. They are related to factors such as maintenance and maturing reservoirs. It has been accepted that for the period 2008 to 10, the major upstream producers went into hibernation as far as investment was concerned. The public record shows from 2002 to 2010, the upstream companies and the energy chamber were literally screaming and then begging for new fiscal incentives. But the then PNM government refused to facilitate with predictable results. The records of this very parliament will show, Madam Speaker, that during 2010 to 2015 in successive finance bills, the partnership government passed legislation that amended the law on 14 occasions to make the fiscal regime more competitive. These incentives These incentives, some of which were alluded to by the Honourable Minister of Finance in his budget statement, have caused a resurgence of investment in the upstream sector. These changes to the fiscal regime have had the desired effect. According to central bank data in 2010, foreign direct investment in the petroleum sector was just US $501 million. For the year 2014, which we have the numbers for, that figure for petroleum sector related FDI was US 2.1 billion, or a four-fold increase. One of the main projects in the energy sector is the Juniper project, which is an investment of US 2.1 billion by BP. This project was sanctioned in 2014. Work started on construction of the platform November 2014. However, the construction of the platform was disrupted, Madam Speaker, by industrial relations issues. We trust that the government will get this Juniper platform, the issues there to related, off the ground so that we can reap the benefits from the work being done by BP. I turn now, with your leave, Madam Speaker, to the platform for the future. The Minister of Finance, by his own admission, stated that production from new wells and discoveries take 5 years. By this logic, the production issues of the last 5 years can be traced to decisions and indecision of the previous 5 years. That is the period 2005 to 2010. That being said, the former partnership administration has left a platform for the new government to build on. Some of the initiatives of the last 5 years will show significant results in the years to come. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance would have to admit it, but the fact, would hate to admit it, but the fact is that the PNM administration has inherited from the partnership a comprehensive natural gas master plan, which from all indications, it seems they plan to discard. However, this document was a product of 9 months' work by an internationally recognized and reputable consultancy, Prt1 and Partners. It is meant to be used to guide policymakers and to guide the renegotiation of contracts with multinationals. It was done using broad-based consultation. It would be a crying shame, therefore, if the new government should discard this work because it was conceptualized by the partnership administration. They have also inherited a deep water exploration program that is well in train. This is being led by BHP Billiton. Seismic work is completed and drilling of 8 deep water wells will commence next year. Even further, they have inherited a progressive forward program of work from the upstream companies, most notably BP and BG, with investments in natural gas developments, including the BP Juniper project, the BP Savannah exploration well to be drilled next year, and the BP Angeline project, which starts in 2018. There is also the BG Lobster exploration well that is being drilled as we speak. BG has also started planning a joint development of blocks 5C and 5D, which is planned to deliver natural gas by 2019. In addition, as we speak, BHP Billiton is doing work on its Angostura Phase 3 project, which is a US $400 million investment. The upstream companies will be busy for the remainder of the decade, thanks to the fact that they were reinvigorated during the last 5 years of the partnership administration. They have also inherited a comprehensive national facilities audit of the entire energy sector that was again conceptualized under the partnership government. And so the contract that the Honourable Minister of Energy spoke about between the Ministry of Energy and DNV of Norway was entered into during the term of the partnership government. This audit will improve the physical asset base of the energy sector, which is aging. They have also inherited the Phoenix Park IPO, from which all reports show a success. When we were in government, they were very critical of this IPO and said it would fail. They were wrong. In every category, the IPO was oversubscribed. In total, it is reported that there is some TT 2 billion worth of subscriptions for what is a TT 1.5 billion worth of shares. Given the uncertain international energy environment, this IPO undertaken by the partnership government is a success. And indeed, Madam Speaker, in the draft estimates of revenue, it proudly includes the IPO monies from this IPO. Phoenix Park IPO is included in the revenue. So that's another revenue mobilizing measure which came out of the previous government. Madam Speaker, it is a fact that the energy sector, which they have inherited from the partnership government, is in a positive position, even when the global energy price challenges are considered. But you would never hear them say that. Instead, they would do their utmost to claim credit for the positive developments in the sector that had nothing to do with them or those on this side. Madam Speaker, I want to publicly sound a word of caution again that they need to tread wisely and not jeopardize further the platform that they have inherited. I turn now just briefly on the global economy, and then I'll take a look at the revenue measures contained in the budget and the expenditure measures contained in the draft estimates. The global economy, we all know, remains caught in the doldrums following on the financial crisis of 2008. The European economy remains flat, with several countries within the euro area continuing to contract. The Far East is slowing with China, and one of the major engines of the global economy, reflecting lower growth. In fact, many analysts believe, Madam Speaker, that the official Chinese numbers are overstated, and the reported Chinese growth is even lower than stated. And last Friday, the latest jobs report on the US economy, the one bright spot at the moment, suggests that the US could also be slowing. The policy of quantitative easing adopted by the advanced economies seems to have run its limit, and the potential that asset bubbles have been created as a result of interest rates remaining too low for too long has increased the risk of another possible financial meltdown. So that's the global scenario in which we find ourselves. And so, Madam Speaker, can I get 38, please? Okay, 1 second. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. We see also in this scenario where the OECD countries are at a loss on how to proceed, and the global economy could be on the brink, Madam Speaker, of a major reversal. In this context, commodity prices have fallen, and commodity exporting countries have seen a reversal in fortunes. Trinidad and Tobago has felt the effect of the combination of the fall in the price of oil and gas and the constraints in increasing output, which I spoke about earlier. It is therefore not surprising that, notwithstanding the forecasts of growth for the local economy earlier this year by the international agencies, in fact, the local economy seems to have contracted for the first half of 2015. It is therefore important that in this context, actions that could result in further contraction are avoided and efforts are made to mitigate the effect of the restructuring that must take place and its effects on the poor and vulnerable in our country. Unfortunately, I say with the greatest of respect, the positions stated in the budget give little hope that the current government understands the problem or have any policy prescriptions that they can offer. Instead, we saw in the budget some manifesto promises plunked in, but apart from the revenue mobilizing mechanisms that the minister mentioned, we see very little by the way of creating revenue creating measures presented in the budget. And perhaps when the ministers speak, they may go into more details as to what would be the revenue generating measures outside of the energy sector and apart from taxes. So tax, that's the revenue mobilization method, but nothing in terms of revenue creation in the economy of Trinidad and Tobago, so desperately needed at this time. And so, when we were in office, Madam Speaker, we were able to return the economy to growth, to address the infrastructure deficit that we inherited, and we sought to get the energy sector moving again. While activity in the energy sector has increased several-fold over where we inherited, output is yet to recover from the many years of neglect that we inherited. As we all know, the gestation time for the new investments in energy sector is between 7 to 10 years. And the challenges with output which we faced from 2012 has its genesis way back at 2005. Now, based on the fiscal changes introduced in the last 3 years, several of the energy companies, as I said before, engaged in seismic studies. The positive results from these, coupled with the facilitative regime was introduced, has caused BHP Billiton to decide to commence exploration activity next year, and BP has commenced work on the Juniper field. However, the results of these will not come to fruition for some years, given the long gestation period needed. And so I was somewhat disappointed to hear the minister speak of changes that the partnership government to the fiscal regime, but that in fact has been the catalyst that has begun to restore the energy sector to life. These changes will certainly be one of the pillars on which future growth will be built. In the context of what is happening globally and our own local challenges, the process of balancing the budget must assume some level of priority, but we know that this must be done without dislocating the entire economy and without placing into greater jeopardy the poor and the vulnerable in our country. We recognize that, Madam Speaker, and we started the process first by bringing the fiscal position close to balance this year, notwithstanding the price drops, the price shocks in oil and gas, and we had started the process of restructuring the economy with increased emphasis on public-private partnerships in the context of more stringent government finances. And so before we left office, arrangements were put in place for several schools to be constructed, including early childhood centers, using the Prt1 model with the assistance of the IDB. And indeed, we had turned south for another 3P project, which was the Carlton Lane housing, HDC housing construction in San Fernando, which is engaged in through the Prt1 model. Madam Speaker, the statements that have been made in the budget speech shows that the new government at times seems to be more concerned with scoring political points than in dealing with the fundamentals facing the country. One of these points related, as I said before, to the treasury being depleted, but that's depleted. Look, with the fall in the prices of the oil, the government has had to deal with resultant cash flow implications. The fall in the price of oil from about $100 per barrel down to, I think now it's about $46, has a $49.53, but in January as at 45, so I'm speaking in the 2015 downturn. That affected the cash inflows to government, affected cash inflows to the partnership government. However, the cash flows of the government remain strong, and with prudent management, they can withstand the challenges that the country faces. On closer management, much closer management is needed now than a year ago or even 5 years ago. And so it is quite correct to say that prior to leaving office, the government's overdraft balance at the central bank had built up as a result of the fall in revenues. Minister spoke about that. The former government was aware of this and had programmed cash inflows to deal with this problem. Again, they are the same matters contained in the budget statement at page 59 as revenue mobilizing mechanisms. However, the minister did not state the amounts to be realized from each of those measures, though he named them. One was the TT-NGL IPO. From that is expected to 1.5 billion. As I say, the estimates of revenue does contain a number of 1.5 billion coming from that. Close to 4 billion from the loan repayment due from a state enterprise. 500 million as tax dividends from another state enterprise, I think it's NGC. And in addition, the end-of-year tax payments conservatively estimated at 6 billion was also due to come in at the close of fiscal 2015. And also, arrangements had been made for a $1 billion loan to deal with any issues of delayed timing in any of those expected receipts at the close of fiscal 2015. So the effect of this was that the cash inflows over the 7-week period from September 7 was projected to have been about 13 billion. Was expected to be 13 billion. Now, this was sufficient to put government in a strong cash position and to provide operation cash flow to government, given that the budget would not be approved until the end of October. However, the projected cash flows needed to be strongly followed up and needed to be properly managed to bring them to book within fiscal 2015. Obviously, that was not done. It should be noted that the inflows from the IPO, the dividends and taxes and so on mentioned, would not only have tied the government over the period to the end of the fiscal year, but would have resulted in a very good fiscal outturn for the 2015 fiscal year. Given that these are now carried forward into the 2016 fiscal year, it is clear that the arrangements have been made, and are still there on the basis of what was done by the partnership government in 2015. Now, given that the government has shown a balanced fiscal outturn for the first 6 months of the last fiscal year, 2015, with a small surplus of 47 million, which had deteriorated slightly to a deficit of about 1 billion for the 9 months to June, a cash inflow of 2 billion prior to the end of September would have resulted in the government showing a far better fiscal outturn for fiscal 2015 than any of the rating agencies would have expected, given the fall in the oil and gas prices. Now, I note that the minister said that the figure has ballooned to $7 billion. Although I'm aware that the figure is only an estimate, given the budget numbers for 2015 revenue and expenditure, and that it would have been prepared before the end of the fiscal year, again, I say the minister needs to provide a detailed account of this change during his winding up. I have noted that part of the increase seems to have arisen from the increase in capital expenditure, and so we ask the minister to explain how a further 4.5 billion in capital expenditure occurred in 3 months, when only $3.9 billion was spent in the previous 9 months. And we ask him to give us the specifics on the amounts, the purpose and the dates on which the major payments were made. We look forward to his explanations, since whilst it may not be good politics for him to say that the partnership government, whilst it may be good politics for him to say that the partnership government was profligate in its spending, I think we need to remember that whatever he says is carefully monitored by rating agencies and therefore can impact on our international standing. Going forward, I want to emphasize the exceptional cash flows to be generated from the resolution of the CLF and CLICO crisis. These can be used to repay debt or to assist with the management of cash flows as government brings the management of the economy in line with sustainable cash flow generation. In addition, we should note that the country has strong financial buffers, which I mentioned before, the HSF, the gross official reserves, and of course the unemployment rate down to single digits is perhaps one of the lowest in the world. Debt to GDP now stands. That is, the unemployment rate is amongst the lowest in the world. The debt to GDP is at 46% now. So the government, new government, with astute management of the economy, they can weather the tighter cash flows and they can bring the economy to sustainable levels in face of lower revenues. However, Madam Speaker, I am not at all confident that that government is up to the task or has the capability to manage the current situation as far as the proactive management of cash flows are concerned. And the extent of that inability to understand is demonstrated when the Honourable Minister spoke of the cash balance when they demitted office in 2010 and did not refer to the billions of dollars owed to contractors and funds needed to be injected into CLICO. As I have said, while the Minister spoke of a $5 billion debt arising from wage negotiations, he did not adjust for the payments that have already been made to teachers and payments made partly to the civil service workers, nor did he adjust for the fact that approximately 20% of the payments are deducted as taxes prior to actual payment, so the net effect is considerably lower than he stated. And therefore I would like the Honourable Minister again to, in his winding up, to show us how he arrived at the $5 billion debt needed to pay workers' salaries and wages. As a consequence of any inability to manage an economy which has to face up challenges of the changes in the global economy, we do not doubt that when the new budget, the real budget, or the other half of the budget comes in the next few months, that every attempt will be made to blame their inability to manage the situation on the partnership government. The current environment calls for proactive management, visionary leadership, and the ability to create partnerships with stakeholders.
Madam Speaker, 53.
I'm on my legs.
53E, F and G.
Is that a point of order, Honourable Morvant?
Yes, Madam Speaker, 53E, F and G.
Excessive crosstalk.
I would just like to remind all members of this Honourable House of the Standing Orders 53 and ask that we observe these so that the contribution can be completed.
Madam Speaker, I thank you very much for your intervention. You know, Madam Speaker, sometimes when you can't take the heat, you tend to explode. And I'm seeing that very clearly coming from the other side. But when you're in the kitchen, you have to feel the heat. So we shall continue, and I thank you for your intervention. Madam Speaker, I'm saying that the present environment calls for proactive management, visionary leadership, and the ability to create partnerships with stakeholders throughout the economy. It also requires especially that the poor and vulnerable are not unduly impacted, not only because this is morally justifiable, but also because it ensures a social stability and continuing commercial activity, which keeps business activity going. Madam Speaker, the partnership government has shown that it is possible to balance the fiscal outturn. The partnership government of 2010-2015, now continuing in opposition, Madam Speaker, we have shown that it is possible to balance the fiscal outturn, notwithstanding lower oil prices, and also that we had a clear plan for ensuring that the economy continued to perform strongly in the years to come. What have we received, Madam Speaker? It seems that, driven by the need to condemn the previous government, the Minister of Finance has completely abandoned the government's responsibility to lead us in these difficult times when our economy is impacted by global events beyond our control. We had refused to be hysterical or to panic the population when energy prices fell rapidly at the start of fiscal 2015. We took appropriate measures. We preferred to guide or help the mental adjustment to the facts of turbulence in the world economy and the resulting decline in real revenues from the energy sector. And here it is. In some ways, it seems the Minister presents an irresponsible, internally contradictory budget statement, which seeks to continue the adversarial election campaign. It doesn't appear to want to unite the people of the country for the necessary adjustment or the change in thinking and ideas that must be imperative if we are to transform our economy from dependence on energy. And so it is a farce, really, and exceedingly dangerous to blame the previous government for the recession in China, for the global financial crash, or the other geopolitical factors responsible for that dramatic decline in oil and gas prices. To blame me or the previous government for the state of the world economy generally, or the energy market particularly, is nothing but irresponsible and does not lead to a national consensus of how we must all adjust and work to transform our economy from dependence in energy. Indeed, the Minister appears to be setting the stage for when his plans fail, where he places responsibility on the shoulders of the private sector. And he says, and I quote, at page 56 out of the same budget statement, I quote, "The recovery of the economy will depend critically on the reaction of the private sector to the improved business environment and other measures being introduced to ease the labor shortage and improve productivity. And we ask the private sector to partner with the government to make its share of the required investment to bring about economic revival." End of quote. Sadly, Madam Speaker, I say with due respect, there is little in the budget to generate business confidence, to motivate significant investment, and in fact nothing in this budget which, if implemented successfully, would ease the labor shortage and would improve productivity. I turn now, Madam Speaker, to foreign relations, again mentioned by the Honourable Minister. when he said, and I quote, that it was his government's intention to restore our international reputation, especially with investors, multilateral institutions, and credit rating agencies. Whilst there may have been changes with respect to the economy, there have been minimal ratings adjustments. Our country's international ratings remain very strong. You may recall, Madam Speaker, in recognition of this, the leaders of two most powerful Asian nations, Japan and China, visited our shores and pledged bilateral cooperation in areas of diplomacy, economics, and cross-cultural collaboration. In July 2014, His Excellency Shinzo Abe made a courtesy call and visited with us here in Trinidad and Tobago. In addition, President Xi Jinping of China became the first leader of that country to visit Trinidad and Tobago. Additionally, the Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, upon the direction of President Obama, also visited Trinidad and Tobago as part of his three-country trip to reinforce partnerships in the Americas. This is indeed a testament of TT's stellar reputation as a global leader, despite being a small island state. I note also that within our administration, we were able to negotiate for the waiver of the Schengen visa for Europe, which means that any TNT citizen traveling to Europe will not require a visa. I think it was about 28 countries, the waiver for the Schengen visa. A great feat in terms of foreign relations negotiated. Also dealing with, again, in this area of foreign relations, foreign direct investment, perhaps this is one of the best indicators of confidence in a country's economy in the form of FDI. Trinidad and Tobago is a regional leader in foreign direct investment, and under the previous government in Trinidad and Tobago, FDI grew to consistently historic levels. In fact, according to a UN report, Trinidad and Tobago alone accounted for 27% of total global FDI inflows amongst small island developing states in 2014. And so we will see FDI inflows. This is total. I'd spoken earlier about FDI inflows into the petroleum sector. These are, as a whole, into the economy, FDI inflows. 2014, 2.4 in US dollars, US billion, 2.4 billion. 13, 1.99 billion. 12, 2.45. 11, 1.83. 2010, 0.54. 2009, 0.7, 2008, 2.8, and so on. So we were able, through our 5 years in office, to increase foreign direct investment inflows into the country. In addition to that, we were able to negotiate several global partnerships in trade. In the last 5 years, under the previous government, which I led, Trinidad and Tobago strengthened and enhanced our position in global trade. This is evidenced by multiple bilateral trade agreements and partnerships with regional powerhouses, Guatemala, such as Guatemala, El Salvador, and Panama. All of these we were able to negotiate and have brought into effect a partial scope agreement with Guatemala, with Salvador, a partial scope agreement with Panama. We have formalized a partial scope agreement there as well, and we formalized diplomatic links, and we indeed opened a diplomatic mission in Panama. So those are areas on the on respect to foreign relations. Again, I say we have left the country on a sound platform, on a sound footing, and we look forward to the advancements that may be made by the new government. I turn now, Madam Speaker, to issues of expenditure. And I would look at the draft estimates of expenditure for financial year 2016 as compared to 2015 contained in this volume. And I turn to national security. Because you see, much is being made of the great increase in the allocation to national security. Great increase in that. And $10.8 billion, yes? In his budget statement, the Honourable Minister said at pages 31 and 34, reduction in crime represents the foremost demand by our citizenry. At page 36, he said, our first priority is to establish an optimal security apparatus. And he says again, consistent with our policies, I have made appropriate allocations to the various sectors. National security, $10.81 billion, to tremendous debt stumping. Now, this news, Madam Speaker, was welcomed by many throughout Trinidad and Tobago, as national security appeared to have received the biggest slice of the budget. In an immediate response, the Honourable Prime Minister took to the forefront as reported in the print press and carried in live interviews post-budget statement, to herald that the biggest slice of crime was for crime and national security. The headline in the Trinidad Guardian, October 6, 2015, biggest slice for crime control, PM is the headline. In their Vox Pop on October 7, the Guardian asked, how should the government prioritize the $10 billion allocated to reduce crime? The editorial in the Newsday, October 7, one of the most striking aspects of the Ministers of Finance maiden budget is the overall increased allocation for national security. According to Prime Minister Dr. Rowley's count, it is the first time since 1956 that the national security budget has been so supreme. And you see here again, Madam Speaker, the facts and the figures are very stubborn things. They will eventually drown out any fiction, and it's the facts and the figures that we turn. Firstly, we have to understand that the 10.8 billion allocated to national security is composed of several things. The new government collapsed the Ministry of Justice into the Ministry of National Security. So all the heads of expenditure that would have been in the Ministry of Justice, the majority of them were transferred to the Ministry of National Security. In the 2015 revised estimate, the budgetary allocation for expenditure was $1.1 billion. $1 billion. So first of all, an additional $1 billion is now catapulted into the Ministry of National Security. But it goes further than that, Madam Speaker. Because you see, in addition to those items from Ministry of Justice, subheads from other ministries were also thrown into the Ministry of National Security. So first of all, the Ministry of National Security's allocation is augmented with that from TTPS. It's separate, but that gives you the national security or the crime-fighting initiatives. It is augmented by the Ministry of Justice's estimates, and it is further augmented by matters coming from other ministries that had existed. So, for example, probation services out of the Ministry of National Security, out of the Ministry of the People and Social Development, has now been catapulted into the Ministry of National Security. Lifeguard services from the Ministry of Tourism has now been catapulted into the Ministry of National Security. The criminal injuries compensation that was in legal affairs is now thrown into national security. The National Operations Center from the Office of the Prime Minister has also been mixed into the Ministry of National Security. I make no comment as to the rightness or wrongness of these insertions into national security. My concern here is with dealing with what is seen as the unprecedented $10.8 billion being allocated to the Ministry of National Security. So this is the state of play, Madam Speaker. The manner in which it is comprised is one area that we look at. In addition, the total allocation then under the previous government for national security would have been in the region of about 8-point-something billion. So the increase to 10 billion, and I'll come to how that increase, that additional amount would now be placed in there. The increase in 2016, as I say, is because several subheads have been brought under the Ministry of National Security from other ministries. And the increase, Madam Speaker, is also because of the increase in personal expenditure, wages and salaries, which we negotiated and settled for the protective services, all the protective services under the previous government. And therefore, I call upon the Minister of Finance or the Minister of National Security, should he speak in this debate, to show us what new have you done in the fight against crime. Given that it is your priority, the increase can be accounted for, as I say, from bringing in the other heads of expenditure from other ministries. But equally important, if not more important, that increase comes as a result of wages and salaries for the protective services. And if we were to look at the draft estimates of expenditure for the financial year 2016, we would see that personal expenditure, which is on head 22, National Security, personal expenditure, there's a variance from 2015 of 2.542 billion, which is again wages and salaries and matters related thereto. So what within your expenditure pattern does this 10.8 billion? What is new? Indeed, even the ships that we order from Damen, they've kept them in here, and they've kept, and it's totally incorrect to say it is on trust. I didn't intend to get there, but I can look at it. Can we look at Development Program 2016? In 2015, your own books, your own records show that payments were made on the China vessel and on the Damen ships. Payments were made. And you have now included further payments to be made on the Chinese vessel and on the Damen ships. The Chinese vessels has not arrived. It has been, but you included in your estimates and you're going to pay for it. That's what you said. Madam Speaker, incessant. I wouldn't even say it's excessive now. I think it's incessant. And Digamati Northeast. You will have your chance to respond, sir. You will have your chance.
Honorable member, I'm on my legs. I would ask the members of the House to please observe the decorum of the House. Allow the member to continue her contribution, and while we understand that there would be some crosstalk,
It's excessive.
we ask that you abide by the standing orders and restrain yourself from excessive crosstalk. I would not want to invoke the standing orders, please.
Again, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In their own estimates provided, Madam Speaker, we see under the DP program coming out of the consolidated fund payments for those two vessels, those two sets of vessels. This is to be found at page 68 of the draft estimates of the development program out of the consolidated fund. In 2015, 77 million had been paid on the acquisition of one multi-purpose vessel. This was from China. And the acquisition of naval asset, 557,184,144 was paid through the estimates through the fiscal 2015 monies. And it is now estimated for 2016 for additional amounts to be paid. So those vessels, Madam Speaker, from their own estimates show that they were paid. So I'm saying I would like to see, the Minister spoke about the optimal architecture and porous borders and locking down the borders and so on. What new is in here? Salaries and wages gives you an increase, yes. Bringing other subheads into the head national security gives you an increase. But from this, there is very little, Madam Speaker, in terms of new crime fighting methods. And in fact, if we were to look at the development program, we would see, whereas in 2015, and what I've done is to combine the justice heads with the national security heads and so on, we would see that there is in fact a decrease in the development program in certain areas. Now, I noted there are a few items in it for a fingerprinting facility for immigration, for passports, and by the way, this 10-year passport, you know, since August, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been issuing 10-year passports. Since August. You know, I was supposed to bring one and show you, but we'll bring it another day, sir. We'll get one and show you. Since August, you know, so.
We'll get one for 20 years.
And then now, we see, I need to find the estimates where they're doing police stations and so on. Check under the IDF for me. At the back, IDF, under head 22. Yes, Madam Speaker. So again, you know, as I say, we all welcome this great increase, but there's very little in there for any new crime fight initiatives. I was saying there was, yes, thank you. IDF.
Honorable Member for Digo Martin,
22.
North East,
22.
please. I'm hearing you.
22. Thank you, Madam. Yeah. And I would welcome any intervention from the Minister of National Security to point at any new initiatives for crime fighting as contained in that tremendous increase in the national security budget. That, I think, has been really, some people may call it a hoax, but I wouldn't go that far, Madam Speaker. And the boasting of how this great increase is now, you're now ready and you put all your money, the most money, into fighting crime. Very little. Some people may call it deception. Yes, deception. I turn now, I deal with that with expenditure, and in fact there are many other areas of expenditure which are, you know, the numbers are deceptive, and I think other members in their contributions would go into those, but I thought it important to speak to the national security matter because it is an area that concerns every single citizen in this country. The fight against crime remains a priority. So you would see, yeah, keep looking for it. Revenue measures now, Madam. So other expenditure matters, other members, I trust, would speak on those. Revenue matters. These are the taxation measures introduced in the budget. An increase in personal allowance for all individuals from $60,000 to $72,000. Now, since individuals would have been paying 25% tax on this additional $12,000 before the budget, the effect of this increase will add $250 per month, this more disposable income, into the hands of those taxpayers. That effect would give you, as I said, $250 per month, and that works down to the very princely sum of $8 per day, which PricewaterhouseCoopers says will boost consumption, and this should contribute to much needed economic growth. But you know, Madam Speaker, I'm not sure if you eat doubles, but that $8 per day cannot even buy two doubles. Cannot even buy two doubles. And I cannot therefore see the explanation being given that by doing this you will boost consumption and so contribute to much needed economic growth. I'm sure there are far more impressive measures for dealing with economic growth. So the reality, however, is that the additional VAT, the increase in fuel costs in the business levy and in the green fund levy and NIS effectively negates any benefit hopeful citizens could have received from this measure of the increase in the personal allowance. The increase in the rate of the business levy I turn to. The business levy was primarily aimed at persons and businesses reporting losses and who would therefore be remitting no corporation or income tax as a result of the unprofitability of their business. The proposed increase in the rate by 200% for the business levy constitutes the highest rate of business levy since its inception. This will increase the tax liability of those persons whose businesses are already making a loss or negligible profit. In the current economic climate with rising cost of doing business, fall in revenues and profits, this penalizes the small and medium-sized businesses and may in fact contribute to them going out of business. That could be seen as another penalty for small business development. The Minister, however, in raising this tax seems to recognize the adverse effect this budget will have on small and micro enterprises, that is, sending them out of business. Because how else can we explain that with an average of $2.19 million revenue from this business levy between 2010 and 2015, the average per year $219 million, the tax is raised by 200%, but in the estimates of revenue for 2016 under the business levy, it is estimated not at a commensurate 200%, but instead at 175% of that. So how can you raise the business levy by 200%, but you do not get an increase in revenue of the 200%, instead a lower revenue? And is it then that those businesses will expect businesses to be going out of business? How exactly do we arrive at the estimates given in this book, revenue estimates? Is it that more SME businesses will simply close their doors because they cannot afford to pay this increase of 200%? And the suspicious underlying trend continues when we turn to the green levy fund. With the green fund levy at 0.1%, the average over the years 2010-15 was $354.7 million per year. The minister increasing this tax by 200% should also have netted an increased revenue of 200%. Instead, again, in the revenue estimates, the minister's 200% increase in this tax, according to him, will yield $544.5 million. And that is significantly less than the 200%, which would have been $709 million that should have been netted. So again, you have a 200% increase, but no reflection of that revenue at 200%, and instead lower than the increase in the tax. So where is it going? Where is that money going if it is that you have increased it? And I hear him mumbling and muttering, and perhaps he would explain what has happened to it. So how did he arrive at these calculations? What is he telling us? Or is it then that he's really projecting that fall in the revenue? Because again, businesses going out, closing their doors and not continuing in business. It is obvious these costs will be passed on to the consumer by way of even higher prices. I turn now to VAT, and again, this to me is very deceptive, with the greatest of respect, the numbers for the VAT. The first thing the minister did was to increase the registration threshold. He said the effect of increasing that threshold and so on to $500, yes, 500,000, yes. So a business would have to be earning $500,000 in order to register and pay VAT and claim VAT. And claim VAT, you see? That is the point of it. So by increasing it to $500,000, this constitutes an increase in the cost of doing business, because for small businesses and new startups, they would not be able to claim their input VAT through the VAT system. They lose that. So they would have been able to claim, as you know, when you pay VAT, you can claim back VAT. They will have to pay VAT on their goods and services that they acquire, but they will not be able to claim their input VAT through the VAT system. So again, you are cutting down their earnings. This does not affect existing big businesses, but when this is tied to the betting levy and the green fund levy, it constitutes what could be called three strikes, a triple whammy against the small and micro enterprise businesses. And so every small retail outlet, every person, with a small business, a parlor, a shop, you would feel the brunt of this triple whammy. Unless, if you're a big businessman, it wouldn't matter to you, because you would cross the limit, you'll be able to reclaim your VAT, of course, pay your VAT and reclaim it. And in any case, the big business doesn't pay the business levy because they pay corporation tax. So what would happen to those who have currently abided by the law and registered, but they have not crossed the $500,000 threshold? Would their VAT registration be automatically cancelled? And should they have claimed any VAT back, would they get it, those who are already in the system under the lower threshold? I turn on the same VAT issue now to this whole business of the reduction on VAT. The reduction of VAT from 15 to 12 12.5% is for the benefit of whom? Already the items which may be described as essentials, foodstuff, medication, etc., they are zero rated, they are VAT free. So it is more likely that persons involved in the purchase of luxuries and non-essentials would be the ones who will benefit from the reduction in VAT. What the Minister of Finance is really offering the population is an increase in the money every person spends on VAT, because the vulnerable, the poor, the single parent, the households, those most in need are now going to be penalized by having to pay VAT on a wide range, on a range really of secret items, because we don't know what they are. They had secret items that they will now put this 12.5%. So you're going from 0 to 12.5%. At the moment, no one knows which items those would be. So it would appear that they're using the VAT as a weapon against the vulnerable. And therein lies, I think, the fundamental difference between our government and the present government. In 2008, whilst I was in opposition, I contributed to a motion brought by then MP Harry Prt1 on high food prices. I pointed out that under the previous PNM government, between 2002 to 2007, food prices had increased by over 200%. At that time, I called for the removal of VAT on all food items in the short term, whilst we worked towards increasing food production. I am very proud to say that under our previous government, we took a decision to improve the livelihood of every citizen, and we removed VAT on all food items, 7,000 food items, making clear that luxuries remain subject to VAT. Here it is now, this new government is seeking to undo that protection for people in their very first budget. Not only by raising the prices of food and other items on their secret list by the 12.5%, because it is a fact. Yes, because we don't know. Madam Speaker, I will demonstrate why it is deceptive to say that you do not know what those items will be. And I'll come to that in a moment. It is a fact that prices will escalate by substantially more than the 12.5% as a consequence of this action. And so we see the level of deceptiveness within the numbers. The minister announced a reduction in VAT. He glossed over the fact that the average citizen will in fact have to be paid more for food, basic items in the grocery, and obviously food inflation will increase. The minister already knows what items will now become VATable. And I say he must know because he was able to calculate what the tax returns would be. Yes. He was able to tell us what the tax returns would be, and you can only know that if you know which items you can collect the tax on. That is why I say a secret list. You see? And so we call upon him to tell us what those items are. I'm sure the population would want to know. And I hope they don't end up like the day before the budget. You know, I remember years ago we had a standing phenomenon happening in this country before any PNM budget. All the cars would line up outside the gas station. You know, for the first time in 5 years on Sunday before Monday's budget, it happened again. It happened. And it continued into Monday. Madam Speaker, it continued. And not only that, people lined up and some gas stations ran out of gas. Back again. Back to the future with the PNM administration. You know, when we came to Parliament on Monday, Madam Speaker, it cost us cheaper to get here than when we left this Parliament. It cost us more because the gas prices had gone up at the pumps. And so I'm saying, I come back to this VAT issue. I'm saying in order for the minister to tell us what the outturn is going to be from the increase in the VAT and so on, minister must know what those items are in order to calculate it. The list of zero items, rated items as contained in Schedule 2 of Chapter 7506 include food, and so we call upon the minister to tell us which foods he's going to give this 12.5 from 0 to 12.5%. Thank you. Is he going to force citizens to pay more for coffee? Is that a luxury item? Sardines, curry, corned beef, ketchup, cricks, macaroni, cooking oil, saltfish. Which of these items may be classified? We ask the Honourable Minister to let us know. There are items within the zero rated which are to deal with health items, prescription medicines, pharmaceuticals, diabetic equipment, equipment for injured or disabled, eyewear. Which of these will now attract 12.5%? In agriculture, there are others as well. So in each area, the 7,000 zero rated items, we asked the minister to tell us which ones. I know that books also attract zero rated. Renting of properties, construction equipment, information technology, within the communications and networking field, marine equipment, sports equipment, and so on. Which of these will now or will soon attract the 12.5%? Madam Speaker, I selected some of these items because the removal of VAT from them effectively contributes to the welfare of at-risk citizens, as in the case of food, transport, water, and sewage, or indirectly as in the case of books and construction equipment and so on. And so the multiplier effect of this proposed institution of VAT on these items is a retrograde step, which will have obvious inflationary repercussions, undoing the years at which we were able to keep inflation in this country at single digits. But again, Madam Speaker, again, the deception is in the numbers. Income from VAT. The minister, in his budget statement, was very clear at page 63. He said, the combination of widening the base, increasing the collection and compliance, and reducing the rate, that is the VAT, is expected to yield $4 billion. How did he arrive at these calculations? Which ones of the items has he already identified to make it up? So in other words, citizens will have to pay an additional $4 billion in VAT as a result of these measures, and that's bad enough. If the minister's words are to be believed, but can we believe him that it will yield $4 billion? No. As I said, the deception is in these numbers. In this, the revenue estimates for 2016, Madam Speaker. At page 9 of the draft estimates of revenue, we see on the head taxes on goods and services, page 9, subhead 07, and that is value added tax. So this book tells us how much revenue is estimated to come from the reduction in VAT, by the way, the reduction in VAT. And we will see here that the value added tax under chapter 7506, the estimated revenue is not what the minister has said. In 2015, the revised estimate was $6.7 billion. Remember, the minister said he will get $4 billion. In this book, it says at page 9 that the 2016 estimated revenue coming from the reduction in VAT and putting VAT onto zero-rated items will yield $12.3 billion. $12.3 billion. And so the minister needs to explain, how have you reduced VAT to 12.5%, and yet you intend to get double the revenue? That's one point, intending to get double the revenue, and the other point is that the minister misled or misspoke when he told the House, that it would be $4 billion. $4 billion. So is the minister correct? Or is the Minister of Finance correct in his speaking? Or is the revenue estimates correct? Which one should we believe? Excuse me.
What Houdini economics is that?
As we come down to the end, you know, the minister seems very concerned about alcohol. At the moment, alcohol is rated at 15% VAT before you introduce your amendment to 12.5. up to your budget, people in this country, you see, thank you. You see, when we were doing the 7,000 items, we were very involved, then Minister Barrett, myself and others, in going through the items to leave out what we thought were luxury items and others. And therefore, all those items you were paying 15% VAT. They have now decreased all items to 12.5. Madam Speaker, please.
Speaker, you have the same color, but now.
Yeah, should be able to.
Members, please let's get on with this. I call upon the Honourable Leader.
Thank you very much. There isn't, I wouldn't be on my legs much longer, Madam Speaker. And so we were speaking about the value-added tax and the fact that the minister talked about $4 billion more, when in fact there's almost $6 billion more. And so at the point of writing his budget speech, the minister was fully aware that the revised estimate of VAT revenues in 2015 was $6.7 billion. At the point of telling us he was fully aware, excuse me, that the additional VAT revenue he expected to get was not 4, but 5.7 billion. And so, which one to believe, Madam Speaker? And that is why he has not specified a list of items which he would deem non-essential and which will now face an increase in price overnight of a minimum of 12.5%. And because we have to also include the cost of the business levy, the green fund levy, fuel prices, NIS, and other costs. Another point to consider is that while the minister says the items that he thinks are not essential, he still thinks that it will result in VAT revenues almost doubling. And so, again, the minister needs to explain how he calculated the numbers which he shared with us. Madam Speaker, the minister revealed that the P&M budget deficit was 12.4 billion. In other words, he planned to spend 21.4 billion more than what he said the revenues were. He proposed to generate 18.6 billion from a series of sources. The majority of this, the 13.4 billion, comes from, again, those measures at page 59. As such, then, the only real initiatives the minister was able to introduce to generate revenue to spend on his vanity projects came from the listed items on pages 58 and 59 of the budget speech. Again, let us just examine those very quickly. The minister spoke about the start of reform of the VAT system. I've already spoken about that. He spoke about enhanced tax collection, fuel subsidy revenue reduction, increased business levy, green fund levy, property tax $200 million. And I just want to pause for a moment on that property tax of $200 million. Again, we go to the Bible when we want to see what are the sources of revenue. And if we go into property taxes, we would see the minister has estimated to get $200 billion under that heading. $200 million from that. $200 million. And, but it's not in the speech, I'm just ad-libbing it right now. $200 million. $200 million for property tax. But what is very strange, it is not contained under the head lands and building taxes, which is the old law. It is not contained under property tax, which is the law that the Honourable Minister said they intend to implement. That's the law that was passed but not proclaimed. Instead, there is a strange head which says industrial land tax, estimated revenue $200 million. I would ask the Honourable Minister in his winding up to say when and where and how was that tax levied, on whom would it be levied, and what is the criteria for such a measure being introduced. So that is one of his mobilization methods for revenue. So the minister wants to get 5.2 billion from these sources of revenue, and he needs to tell the country, you know, he talked about 6.7 billion and did not include any anticipated revenue from taxes on gaming and so on. Again, we want to find out the details. As I say, the devil is in the details Madam Speaker, and we would be very happy if the Minister would provide those details. Okay, fine. The Honourable Minister spoke about transparency and accountability for public expenditure in his budget speech. He talked about careful screening and review and containing expenditure and so on. He talked about adjusting expenditure downwards by 3.7 billion, bringing the total expenditure for 2016 to 63 billion, inclusive of the 5 billion in arrears. But it appears that somewhere, in a blink of an eye, he makes $100 million disappear. $100 million just disappears when he speaks of this. You see, and then we'll have to ask, well, where did that money go? The $100 million, and he talks about 63.1. But on another occasion, he stated very clearly that the expenditure was 63 billion. Now you may say it was an error or a typo, but not only is it written in the text, the Minister said it in his speech, that expenditure would be at 63 billion. And when he did his calculation to bring the expenditure up and adjusting and so on, we're looking at 63.1 million. I'll ask one of the others to go into more detail with that, because I do want to close in the final moments that we have to talk a little bit about the rapid rail. The rapid rail, thank you. The member for Diego Martin noticed the Minister of Finance in the post-budget media briefing held right here at the Parliament on Monday said, and I quote, "We are convinced that our studies and figures are accurate, and we simply want an international agency to confirm and validate our numbers. Our target is to initiate commencement of this project by the end of September 2016. We are giving ourselves a year to make sure all the costings are correct, the approach is correct, and to secure a contractor." And so I want to ask, what studies and figures is the Honourable Minister referring to when he made that statement? Is it the disastrous multi-million-dollar Parsons-Brinckerhoff-Cade and Douglas Comprehensive National Transportation Study and the Mass Transit System Study that this entire rapid rail scheme is being based on? Is it the same CNTS study that the Honourable Minister of Finance was forced to admit in the other place on May 8, 2007 was unsatisfactorily executed by Parsons-Brinckerhoff? But nonetheless, he went on to give the same company the job to conduct the $37 million mass transit study. A Newsday article, March 25, 2010 says, "With nothing substantial to show except for site visits by the EMA, persons doing field surveys, and a letter and questionnaire from NIDCO to possible affected persons, reports indicate that the rapid rail project has already cost this country's taxpayers more than $500 million in consultancy fees." That was in 2010. Madam Speaker, it should not be lost on the population that the Minister attempts to justify his unsubstantiated decision to pursue the rapid rail and to do so expeditiously by reference to the IDB. And he said they have offered to finance this project, and the IDB does not finance projects of this nature unless they are satisfied that it makes sense. He committed his government, he said, to consult with the population at large on all matters of national interest as we move forward. I challenge the Minister to tell the country when he consulted them. Whom did he consult? Were the maxi-taxi associations aware of the threat to their livelihood, because they're now saying they were not consulted? Is the likely rush to remove the subsidies a way of motivating the population towards increasing the cost of transport, thereby making the rapid rail financially viable? And I would ask the Minister to tell us who is the we involved in the project. Who is the we that just happens to have updated studies and figures for a project not justified 5 years ago? I asked the Minister to show us the studies and figures and release the information to the public. After all, it will be taxpayers' money. And so we will look again at that rapid rail project. I want to look at something that is a cost discrepancy. The Minister spoke about that he would remove all traffic lights from Port of Spain to where? To Sanigran.
But it had none from Port of Spain.
Well, first of all, let's say we had already removed from Grand Bazaar, Port of Spain. Those have already gone. But what is interesting is whilst he's touting this rapid rail project, he's talking about removing all the traffic lights, which is the same route that the rapid rail will follow. So are we going to have the double cost of removing all the lights down to Sandy Grande, as well as the cost of doing your rapid rail starting next year? That would seem to be duplicating costs if it is that the rapid rail is ready to replace the route, the road route that is being used and utilized by everyone. So with those words, I wish to close as I thank you, Madam, for your patience in allowing us to make this contribution. I want to thank members on my side for their input and their suggestions and contributions. May I say, as I close, Madam Speaker, in the many years that I've served this country, I have tried in every action as an alderman, as an MP, as Prime Minister, as opposition leader, to ensure that our actions are always directed to those who are most vulnerable. This budget, while purporting to spread the burden of the structural adjustment measures the Minister seems inclined towards, appears to most severely penalize those very persons least able to bear it, the working class and the middle income class, and small businesses. The budget, in my respectful view, is inflationary. It will erode the purchasing power of citizens, undoing work done over the past 5 years in containing inflation rates to single digits. It contains no policies designed to stimulate business, tourism, or any other sector. It contains no plans to treat with the rampant murder rate, which appears to have escalated since the came into office. In fact, I am told, I'm reading that September was the bloodiest month in history. The budget appears designed to punish the vast majority of our citizens, whom they chastise at the start, but will affect every man, woman, and child. What is perhaps worse is that the Honourable Minister admits that more severe measures are forthcoming. So if these measures were not bad enough, the Honourable Minister says there are more severe measures to come. And he does that while pushing vanity projects like the rapid rail, the property tax, the revenue authority, and so on, and a port at Toko, for which he belatedly admits no feasibility has been done. This will only get worse. The Minister clearly has his priorities, and we have ours on the opposition side. We intend to, and we'll continue to, as we say, uphold our oath and to deal with issues that confronts us in this Parliament. Again, I thank you very much, and we are not in government, they are in government. I wish them well in their endeavors to grow the economy and to improve the quality of life of all of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the last time I made a contribution as opposition leader in the budget debate in this Parliament, the last time I did it on 2 occasions, the last 2 times, the Honourable Minister of Finance, who was then thank you, Madam. The Honourable Minister of Finance, who was then was then a minister in the previous PNM government, at the end of my contribution, he stood up and at least on 25 occasions, he said that contribution was errant nonsense, foolish and dotish. Thank you, Dave Martinez. Madam Speaker, I would not want to say that that is what his budget statement was. I would not want to use the same words to reflect upon his budget statement. But there are many people who do believe that that is exactly what his budget statement is about. I thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I call on the Honourable Member for Laventille East Morvant.
Madam Speaker, I thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I would like to thank God for this opportunity, me having health and strength Second of all, I would like to thank the people of Laventille Morvant for choosing me to represent them. Madam Speaker, and I will not forget Madam Speaker, I have heard that plant-like substance causes you to forget. However, Madam Speaker, I would like to first congratulate my colleague for the excellent budget that he presented to Trinidad and Tobago. I am excited for the opportunity for social development, all the solutions for social development in my constituency, strengthening sustainable development, promoting economic growth, encouraging a culture of self-sufficiency, even a vision to support our neighboring constituencies. Laventille Morvant, with the support of the budget that we heard, will transform. It will become a place that will be aesthetically pleasing. And we would have a socially advanced lifestyle. Madam Speaker, first of all, I would like to agree with the honorable member that just spoke, saying that when they came into office, they did not and were not able to speak of all the negatives that the People's National Movement had done. They could not criticize them. I would like to share the vision of Laventille Morvant with the support of the budget that was read. First of all, Laventille Morvant would have an upgrade of infrastructure, roads, drainage, water, lights, transforming our ability to move forward in what we would have to do. I've heard that a number of funds were spent on roads.
He's not reading.
I've heard a number of funds were spent on roads. I look around in my constituency and I see none. I have heard water for all. I don't know if they forgot Laventille Morvant. So, roads and water for who? However, we are committed to giving that facility to the benefit of the constituents of Laventille Morvant. I am very proud to stand on this side of the bench. I am very proud to be part of this team that is going to transform this country into the place that we want it to be. Laventille Morvant is very hurt with what has happened in the last 5 years.
And 50 years.
Laventille Morvant is really looking forward to some serious intervention for the crimes that have been committed against the constituents of my community. There is a past Prime Minister that said teachers that do not support the children and stay away from schools, they are criminals and should be sent to jail. In my constituency, they broke down a school, Lower Morvant, Market School as we all know it. To date, I am very sad to say that all these children have been neglected and we are still waiting on a school to be built.
100.
So these schools that have been said to be built all over the country,
100.
they forgot Laventille Morvant. And I think I agree with the past Prime Minister. They are criminals and should be jailed. Children are suffering in my constituency because of the lack of commitment, to supporting what is supposed to have been done. However, Laventille Morvant stood up and supported the People's National Movement. Laventille Morvant stood up and rejected the UNC government. Laventille Morvant has really understood. Laventille Morvant, the relevance of this, Madam Speaker, is the budget that my colleague had presented shows the support of youth development. Youth development in my constituency has a large part to play in education. The relevance of this, Madam Speaker, is the fact that the young people are given an opportunity to earn more. My colleague has increased the OJT program. The relevance of this, Madam Speaker, is the fact that we are committed to giving equal opportunity, including the constituents of Laventille Morvant. Madam Speaker, if you have 5 children and one of them is sick, why would you leave that sick child alone and go and take care of the other 4? Madam Speaker, Laventille Morvant is a sick child that we are going to take care of. I am very pleased with the budget and with the input for national security, because national security plays an important part in my constituency. I've already had discussions and a significant drive for soft policing has already started. There's a partnering between the community and community groups and national security in bringing together that confidence that we have within the police service and other areas of the protective services. I am also very pleased that the budget supports good governance. Good governance is very significant in the culture that our children are being raised in. Good governance and being a person that children can look up to. We are the leaders of this country, and I'm very pleased that we are focused on good governance, because when a child is growing up and believes that the only way to achieve anything is to steal or to bribe, then we are growing children up with lack of morals. This government, this present government, has took a stand to change that culture that the children had experienced in the past 5 years. This government took a stand to honor what we consider to be important for the youths to look up to. Now, Madam Speaker, we have experienced so much hurt in Laventille East Mover, and this budget supports that change for us. Good governance is critical in people realizing what the government is doing for them. Let me give you an example. We have walked around in the community. We have looked at projects that the previous government had executed. And guess what? Some of these projects that have been paid, we are still searching for them. That is not good governance. So I applaud my colleague for insisting on controlling and regulating agencies that will encourage good governance. And value for money is what we are going to realize. I am very confident that even though we have fallen oil prices and gas prices, the budget presented by my colleague, with proper management, we would realize significant increase in productivity. Opportunity for all is supported by the budget from my colleague. Opportunity for all must be realized. And the young people must have that culture of opportunity for all. Because right now, we have a statistic of unemployment of 3.7%. I walk around in my constituency, and I'm very sure that is not 3.7%. Opportunity for all must be realized, also in Laventille East Mover. And Laventille West. The budget supports a growth and increase in sustainable development. Now, sustainable development is for the young, the old, the rich, the poor. So whatever the country is experiencing and has the benefit of, Laventille East Mover would also have that. We have a lot of potential in increasing manufacturing, the manufacturing industry in our community. We are very privileged to have our national instrument, to have a pan factory in our constituency. And our budget supports that initiative and the partnering of that initiative with the youths that are involved within the constituency to promote our culture and our understanding of Trinidad and Tobago. We have also committed to having community events for young and old, full demography throughout the constituency, throughout the 365 days of the year, to change that way that the country for the past 5 years had shunned Laventille, Morvant, and environs. This government and the budget presented changes that. This government and the budget presented will take and nurture the youths that have been hurt from the state of emergency. That's right. We are still hurt. It is as though the state of emergency was directed to us alone. This government is all-inclusive. There were supposed to be significant plans within the constituency. The Southeast Port of Spain Development and Environs. That was taken away. We have not benefited for the past 5 years. However, this budget encourages growth and development within my constituency. And I applaud my colleague for presenting that. I have heard about homes. I have heard about homes. Madam Speaker, when you walk around in my constituency and you see that the houses and what they did to the houses, it hurts me. Madam Speaker, what they did in the past 5 years was throw paint on places that need significant refurbishment without care of family, without care of survival. This budget presents a fix to that. I am very proud. I'm very pleased. Again, I stand here on the right side for the future growth of Trinidad and Tobago. I look forward to working with my colleagues with this budget presented, bringing things that we have not been able to get for the past 5 years. Community centers have been built throughout the country for the past 5 years. There's a community center that they are trying to construct that is probably the size of a garage located in the Philippines. We have been disrespected. We have been disrespected. And this budget supports growth. We can swim. Yes, we can swim really. And we don't have a pool. I am very proud that we are going to get support, great support through this budget to give the youths of my constituency a plan and ability to swim and grow. Fixing Laventille East Mover and Laventille West is, in Port of Spain in general, yes, correct. That whole area that needs attention will change the whole culture and attitude of Trinidad and Tobago. We will support, we will grow, and out of Laventille, as I've usually historically done, will come out the fruits that will represent this country throughout this world. I'm very happy to be given this opportunity to speak on behalf of my constituency. I'm very happy to be given this opportunity to work with these colleagues that I have in changing the culture, the negative culture that has weaved its way in our country. I'm very happy to be part of that team, to be charged with fixing Trinidad and Tobago. Trinidad and Tobago is a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful twin republic. And with the leadership of my Prime Minister, we will chart our way forward in making Trinidad and Tobago the best place in the world. I thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And let me begin by thanking the constituents of my constituency of Tabaquite for electing me for a second time to represent them here in the House of Representatives and in the Parliament. And to congratulate everyone who has been elected and are here also this morning. Mr. Speaker, I want to begin by congratulating the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for what was indeed a very comprehensive response to the budget presentation of the Honourable Minister of Finance, and in which presentation she was able to skillfully and forcefully and factually debunk the assertions that were made by the Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, in congratulating the Leader of the Opposition for putting the facts on the table, let me also say that what she did is that she dealt with what was a clear effort by the Minister of Finance to negate the contribution of the People's Partnership Government over the last 5 years. In a polarized environment like Trinidad and Tobago happens to be, just after an election, it is easy for people to lap up on truths and to lap up emotive statements like those that were made by the Minister of Finance. But this morning, the national community of Trinidad and Tobago, the international community, will have a different view of what really transpired over the last 5 years, and the platform, the economic platform, the platform for takeoff that was presented to the incoming government as a result of the high performance of the People's Partnership government under the leadership of Kamla Persad-Bissessar. Madam Speaker, let me congratulate the young member for Laventille East Morvant on his presentation. He spoke from his heart, and that's good. And it's good to see that someone is arising from within Laventille to try to deal with Laventille's problems. But Madam Speaker, I want to ask him, where in this budget does he see anything for Laventille? And I ask that very sincerely, because if you look at one area you mentioned was the housing area. They said we started paint and so on the houses. But if you look at the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, you will see there that under the development program, there's 137,500, 500,000. But I see under the different headings, home improvements and housing subsidies program, 25 million, that doesn't relate to Laventille. Squatter settlements, regularization, 72 million, that doesn't, and I'm still trying to find a quick cursory glance, I think you should do it. And go back and ask the Minister of Finance, before the budget is completed, point out to you what is there specific in this budget that relates to Laventille. Because while you talk about the last 5 years, I think it's important also to ask of some of your existing colleagues sitting here in this Parliament, including the Honourable Member for Port-au-Prince South, what it is that they did over 50 years to deal with Laventille. We all feel the pain for people of Laventille like we feel the pain for people all over Trinidad. And this is why I think it's important that you have risen up and said you want to do something for Laventille. But talk about pre-2010 also, when you had some of the highest revenues in the country, yes, and when you had some of the best monies available, and while you developed certain parts of Port-au-Prince, you looked at the hills and you neglected it altogether. And I think, therefore, that is something that you must ask your colleagues about. In terms of the Morvant school, it was an old school, dilapidated, termite infested, older than 50 years. The People's Partnership, People's Partnership decided to build a new one. We relocated the students. The construction of the new school began. And what is the truth of the situation? Crime forced 2 sets of contractors to abandon the jobs there. And the police had to be on site 24 hours to try to complete the construction of that job. I hope with your intervention that we'll be able to deal with the criminal situation, not just in Laventille, but throughout Trinidad and Tobago. It is a serious situation, and I wish the Minister of National Security well in his efforts in trying to curb the situation. But, Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance attempted to paint a most gloomy picture of the economy, attempted to try to convince the population that everything and anything under the sun is wrong with the country and the way it was managed by the People's Partnership. While his leader, the Honourable Prime Minister and member for Diego Martin West, was saying that the sky was not falling down, the Minister of Finance was saying that the sky had fallen down. Madam Speaker, just let me say that while I know I have 45 minutes, I'm just indicating that I'll claim my 10 minutes also extra when that time comes, and I crave that you'll alert me to that time, please. Madam Speaker, so one is saying the sky is not falling down. The other one came here and said the sky has fallen down. But although he said the sky has fallen down, he was able to come here and have a budget that was more than we had last year. $63 billion. $63 billion. We recognize the intent behind the strategy of painting an economy of gloom and doom, which is really to feed on the social media in particular, the kind of attitudes towards negative attitudes and almost hate, revenge against the high performance of a government, the People's Partnership government, and to deepen the sentiments of hate towards members on this side by painting the picture of gloom and doom. But we are unmasking that this morning, and we are dealing with an intelligent population who, having listened to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, as I said, will have a different view this morning, Mr. Madam Speaker, it is their prerogative to say what they want to say, but I also want to place on record, like the Honourable Leader of the Opposition indicated, that 341,000 persons confirmed by their vote that we did a good job, and that we also have a duty to speak for them and to speak for many others who, though they voted for the PNM, also are the voters who will make a difference in the next election, and they will see that we were the best performing government, and that the alternative plans and programs and policies that we present here while we are here on this side will indicate to them that we'll be an even better government in the future, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, you know, having said that, on the adjournment, just as we were winding up last day, the Honourable Leader of Government Business and the member for Aruka Maloney, I thought used a very unfortunate statement across the floor to the Chief Whip on this side, when she said we are in control here. And I thought it was a very unfortunate statement because we are in charge, yes, and I'm glad she repeated it, because it shows the level of arrogance and dismissiveness which the PNM has towards the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And to remind Madam Speaker, that 341,000 persons did vote for those of us who are on this side, and there are many others who voted for the PNM who are waiting to see how they perform and to see the treatment they meet. And if there's an indication of what the Honourable Member just indicated, we are in charge, that they're going to be dismissive and arrogant, not only to the opposition, but to the views that the opposition expresses on behalf of all the people of Trinidad and Tobago, then they are sowing their way out of this parliament. Madam Speaker, I also want to congratulate you, Madam Speaker, for making a change. And the change is this, that you said Amen, Amin, and Namaste. And that is a good sentiment for which you ought to be congratulated. Madam Speaker, governance is as much about the role of the opposition as it is about the role of the government. And let us not forget that. The government needs the opposition to govern this country in the interest of all. And therefore, you can be in charge, as you want to say you are in charge, but the people are in charge of the parliament and the people are in charge of the country. Madam Speaker, a lie that is sufficiently spoken a number of times has the capacity to gain a life of its own and even becomes credible. However, what is the evidence to support the assertion made by the Minister of Finance that the sky has fallen down? The Leader of the Opposition said it. You cannot blame any government for the fall in energy prices. What you must do is evaluate how the government that is there in office responds and makes the necessary adjustments to ensure that the impacts are mitigated, especially with respect to people and their lives in the country. And yes, when the oil shock came earlier in this fiscal year, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition, then Prime Minister, immediately called together the Cabinet and called together the stakeholders and began readjusting our expenditure with the primary objective in mind of protecting jobs and protecting the vulnerable in this society. And let us not forget that. Because if you cannot protect jobs in a country, if you cannot protect the vulnerable in the country, then you are not in the business of governing in the interest of the people, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, apart from Moody's ratings, the country under this People's Partnership has not been downgraded in any significant way for the 5 years we were in office by other rating agencies. It must be that we were doing a good job. It must be that there was confidence in the economy. It must be that people who were rating us saw that this country had a future given the policies and programs we were implementing. Madam Speaker, investors have not left Trinidad and Tobago. Investors have not packed up and closed down. One would expect that in the light of falling energy prices, there would be adjustments by these companies, and the companies are making adjustments. Repsol, BPTT, one expects that. That's the nature of business. But we have to continue to talk to them, as we were doing in the People's Partnership. Talk to them as to how to cushion the impacts of these adjustments, especially on our human resources. We cannot and must not allow a situation to arrive where people are going to lose their homes because they have lost their jobs, where children are going to be improperly fed because their parents do not have the necessary money to put food on the table. Madam Speaker, in that regard, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition made a good point, which I want to reinforce. What is there that has been said in the budget that will inspire the business community, that will inspire the entrepreneurs of this country to add value and, by way of their investments and by the way that they do business, by even their willingness to sacrifice profits in order to secure jobs? What is there that has been said in the budget by the Minister of Finance that will encourage that new kind of behavior, at least over the period where we require some kind of adjustment? Nothing has been there and said to inspire that kind of attitude or behavior on the part of the business community. Instead, what has happened? They have been taxed, and they have been taxed. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance announced a $63.1 billion budget. As I said, this is higher than the 2015 budget, for which they made a lot of hullabaloo. And they criticized. And therefore, despite the verbal antics of the Minister of Finance, who was very uneasy today, I must say, when the Leader of the Opposition was speaking. He fiddled in his chair, he fiddled on his phone, and he was just fiddling and fiddling and fiddling. He was he became very unsure of himself, as he sat there. And his verbal antics, despite his verbal antics when he presented the budget, let me say something. He must have been assured by the technocrats from his ministry that the budget he presented was a feasible budget. The technocrats from the ministry, they would have given him an assurance based on their best knowledge of the situation that what the People's Partnership government had put in place to cushion the impacts of the fall in prices, and especially how to get revenue in the short to medium term, would have made that $63.1 billion budget a feasible budget. So let us not lose sight of something, Madam Speaker. Let us not lose sight of the $13.4 billion in what was described by him as one-time cash that had been made available to the government to tide them over the first quarter and into the second quarter. The Minister of Finance said he brought that $13.4 billion into the new fiscal year. And then he claimed that we had this deficit in the last fiscal 8.5. But he was not telling you that had they managed and gotten that money in, then that 8.5 billion would have been reduced and you would have had a surplus of 5 billion, Mr. Speaker. So he brought it into this fiscal year in order to show that difference he has of $21 billion will be reduced by the 13.4, because he's really bereft of any ideas as to how to close the gap. That is what is happening. How to close the gap. It is very similar to what the Honourable Leader of the Opposition said with respect to national security. What is there new in national security, except that how the budget has been put together, that will give the population the confidence that something is going to happen to reduce especially the murders that are occurring in the country? And let me say, we still have to deal with the murders by looking at what are the domestic murders and what happened. And even when we look at domestic murders and say they are increasing, we have to ask the question, why is there so much anger in the society between people and in terms of relationships? And how are we dealing with that also in the society? Because there is an upsurge of domestic type of murders as against the gang-related type of murders. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance also announced that the sale of assets will take place. And one wants to know whether Prt1 in fact has been put on the chopping block. But if he's referring to the sale of Clico assets, including the Republic Bank shares and the methanol shares, which we are told can bring in about $8 billion, True enough, he may sell this and he may get $8 billion. But when sold, it seems that he intends to use these monies for recurrent expenditure. And as a result, you get that money in, you have sold the shares, then there are no further streams of dividends coming to you. Therefore, you are selling out cash cows, right? You're selling out cash cows, and now you have no dividends coming to you. So the Minister of Finance must now consider whether he should sell assets that are likely to produce a stream of earnings over the long run and also appreciate in value, rather than sell them off and kill the goose that lays the proverbial golden egg. What is it that he's selling off? Which assets? And is he going to deny the country the kind of dividends that can accrue to this country, and also the appreciated value that can accrue to the country over the long run? Is there another way? Is there another way? Yes, we sold FCB shares.
IPO.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The people of the country benefited from those shares. Yes, the people, that's the point I'm going to make. Thank you, Leader. The people of the country bought those shares. So the patrimony of the country remains with the people of the country. But if you are selling the assets of this country that can produce for you a stream of dividends in the future, then you're going to deny the country that kind of sustainable income, and you're making it, and you're using it up in your recurrent. How do you make your assets work for you, especially your natural resources? That's a key question, and it's a matter of philosophy. What is therefore the philosophy by which you are going to govern over the next couple of years? So I believe that the Honourable Minister of Finance, well-intentioned as he is, must now consider a strategy that involves perhaps increased borrowing, at least over the short term, which will have an impact on the debt to GDP ratio. But this is a consideration that you must take into account. Yes, we reached 98% of the borrowing limit on the overdraft. But what are you going to do? Are you going to come to Parliament? Are you going to come to Parliament to increase the borrowing limit? Or are you going to sell out the assets which can be productive in terms of income streams and dividends? It will be tragic. It will be tragic in my view, and in the view of all the citizens of this country, if you sell an asset like Angostura. If you sell an asset like Angostura, a manufacturing and national legend for this country. We need to know what you propose to sell and why you propose to sell it. We need to know. We need to know. You have said that you will be transparent in terms of information the government has and what the people will be allowed to get. You said you'll be transparent. Well, would you be transparent by telling the people what assets you propose to sell? We want to know that, and there must be no compromising on that. If, as you have said in the past, that the patrimony of the country belongs to the people of the country, then the people have a right to know what you are going to sell. What are the assets that you intend to put on the chopping block?
Trade union movement will want to
Madam Speaker, you know, I want to again repeat. The Minister of Finance said that we brought down cash to negative 8.5 billion. And I want to repeat for the benefit of this country that what he did not say was that $13 billion, that inflow, was supposed to be coming in to reduce that overdraft and put us in a surplus position. But he wanted to create so much animosity against us that he chose to speak half of the truth, half of the facts. The whole truth will include that when you presided over the economy when energy prices were high and when you had excessive cash inflows. That was the difference. As a result, you had better and positive cash flows. Tell the country what was the state of the economy in 2010. Tell the country what happened to oil and gas prices over the last 5 years. Tell the country, as the Honourable Leader of the Opposition did, when the slowdown in oil production started. and the number of barrels of oil per day that being produced started, and you'll see it was pre-2010. In managing the country over the last 5 years, what did you want us to do? You wanted us to place heavy burdens and brutality upon the vulnerable in the society? Did you want us to cut the school feeding program so that children who go to school and get a meal could not get a meal? Did you want us to cut the laptops, as you seem to always have had a problem with the laptop program? And I would like to ask the question whether students are in fact going to get laptops this year, and whether the contract with has been done. You know, we demitted office, but we don't know. And I would like to ask on behalf of all the children of the nation and their parents, whether in fact the laptops are going to be made available to the children of the nation as they were made available over the last 5 years. You see, Madam Speaker, I made the point and I'll make it again. A laptop does not serve only the child to whom it's given. Madam Speaker, I'll tell you a very great story. I call it a great story. Also, it could be an emotional and sad story. In my constituency in Tabaquite, just near the RC school, there was a little house behind the house. And I went there in 2011. And there was this little boy with his computer in his hand. But I noticed that there was a little electrical cord run from the neighbor's house to his house because he didn't have electricity. But he was there with his computer. And around him were 3 other children. And he was teaching his siblings how to use that computer that he had gotten. And that computer was serving 4 children in that home. So it's not just about the one child in the school. It is about the child whose parents cannot also afford a computer, and the other children in the home. Because one of the things, the policies of this government, a compassionate government, that's the People's Partnership, is that the poorest child should have the same opportunity as the most fortunate child in this country. That was one of the things we were doing. And maybe people didn't understand that. So when you take away that laptop, if you have done so, look at, you're taking away opportunities. So I want to tell my honorable friend for Laventille East Morvant that maybe when he spoke about opportunities for all, he should also ask about the laptop program and whether the children of Laventille are going to get those laptops. Madam Speaker, did they want us in the last 5 years to cut the number of persons employed in the public service? To fire people at Prt1? We chose, yes, and we are proud that we chose to protect jobs, to ensure that people could feed themselves, that children got a meal at school, that the ability of poor children, and I say it, poor children, to access university through gate should have been cut. Was it that they wanted us to do? So much has been said by upper echelons of the society, people who are more fortunate. So much has been said about GATE. They have criticized GATE. They were prodding us to try to cut GATE and so on. And in the process, try to deny, Madam Speaker, the more unfortunate person. There are persons who could not go to university unless they had GATE. And we kept GATE. We kept GATE, Madam Speaker. We kept GATE. Madam Speaker.
Honorable Member for Oropuch. Honorable Member for Diego Martin West. Please, let's continue.
Franz, what can I start?
I have the time. We started at 12:21.
Okay, thanks. Yes, thanks. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you. Madam Speaker, if it is that the present government thinks that the GATE policy should be changed, then don't keep it under the carpet. Come out and tell the population. You speak about openness and transparency. Come out and tell the population whether you are going to do that. The population wants to know. There are lots of people who are very fearful at this time. Given what they have seen happen in Tobago with the Tobago Ministry and so on, despite what they are saying, people contract come to an end. The fact is people have gone home without bread to put on their table. Madam Speaker, in several regional corporations, people have been sent home over the last couple of weeks, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we created through the very great vision of the Prime Minister and Mr. Fazal Karim a nursing academy to provide trained nurses and sustainable jobs in an economy where you have a shortage of nurses and doctors. Yeah, that's right. Today we have an academy producing nurses where we need over 3,000 nurses in the country. Did you want us to cut that down also? So that those young men and women will have a sustainable job? You talk about moving people from CPEP and URP and so on. Yes, well here is an opportunity where we are giving them sustainable jobs. And it was part of an overall plan. You're building hospitals, the Children's Hospital, the Point 14, the Arima, the expansion of Sani Grandi, and so on. You're building hospitals. And therefore the human resource strategy was in place to feed people into sustainable jobs, creating a sustainable future. We had a vision, we had a plan, which they don't. Which they don't. Madam Speaker, I agree with them, you know. I agree. Where they have spent 12.7 million to support medical students at Cave Hill and Mona. That's a revision of the policy, and they are entitled to that. But please also admit that this government, when we were in government, we created new spaces at the teaching hospital in San Fernando, where we are now able to train more doctors. And if you were to look at diversification, and if we are very creative, in Tobago, the Scarborough Hospital can also be developed, in my view, into a teaching hospital. Of course. It can be developed. And that can be part and parcel of your diversification plan, because there are many foreigners who would be very willing to come to Tobago in a more relaxed atmosphere, conducive to educating themselves, and be educated in Tobago. That should be part and parcel of the kind of diversification and transformation. Diversification is not just, Madam Speaker, about manufacturing and so on. Diversification must be looked at in its entire spectrum of things that can be done. Madam Speaker, maybe what we need to do is to engage the private sector or to engage a foreign university to come into Tobago with an offshore medical school. That's the outside of the box kind of thinking we need. Madam Speaker, these are hard choices. We made some hard choices, but we made them. We made them, Madam Speaker. But the sky didn't fall down. Because if the sky had fallen down, they couldn't come at a $63.1 billion budget. Madam Speaker, therefore I ask. They complain about squandermania. I ask, and I must ask, and ask very loudly. Is it squandermania to keep people employed, to feed children, to keep people above the poverty line, to make sure that they can pay their rents and mortgages and not be put on the streets, and to continue to develop human resource capability, especially in the health sector, with a view to improving the quality of health care and driving in the medium to long term to medical tourism? Those are achievable goals. Was it wrong to build houses for people at subsidized rates? Let me be generous and congratulate the minister, though, on his first budget presentation of a budget. But recognize that we had challenges too. Recognize that the challenge of presenting a budget in a situation marked by falling and unpredictable gas and oil prices is further complicated by the heavy dependence on oil and gas for revenues and the heavy dependence on CARICOM countries for purchasing the majority of our manufacturing exports. And the volatility of CARICOM economies now provides its own levels of uncertainty. Our ability to compete with exporting countries who have the advantages of lower wage rates, economies of scale, and higher productivity calls for a major paradigm in terms of our people's attitude to work and to competitiveness. And one of the things we were doing under the Ministry of Planning and Development and under then Minister Tiwari was in fact dealing with this matter of national competitiveness and the ability of Trinidad and Tobago to be a creative and competitive country in the global environment. And therefore, it will be wise for the new Minister of Planning to look there into that ministry and to build upon the work of the then Minister, Dr. Tiwari, as to how the competitiveness of Trinidad and Tobago could be developed. The fundamental to recovery in Trinidad has to be a shift in culture and in terms of our attitude to work, to creativity and productivity. Madam Speaker, it is imperative, therefore, that as we seek to develop the tourism sector, the leisure sector, the tourism sector, the leisure sector, the entertainment sector, as well as newer areas which will spell diversification. But even if we talk tourism and we talk leisure and entertainment, again we are faced with the question of how do we shift attitudes to service. The only way we'll become a successful tourist destination where people really want to come is in the quality of service. Service is the differentiating factor. Service is the differentiating factor, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Tobago, Matlat, Toko, Cedras, these can be gold mines for tourism. But service, if we don't deal with it, we are going to fall far short of what is required to get world-class service and to get people to come here. Now, we are able to do some things that we must not ever forget. In Chagaramas, a transformation began. A unique experience was being presented to our local domestic tourists as well as those coming from outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And so when they visit Chagaramas now, they were comparing Chagaramas in terms of the infrastructure and the facilities with anything that they could have found in places like Florida or Orlando. I hope in that same context that the government will also give a priority to the development of the San Fernando waterfront project. I hope that that will not be put on the background. And I hope, Madam Speaker, that when they talk about rural development, they will really try and develop pristine areas while you maintain the integrity of the environment and the proper ratio between human settlements and the environment in places like Matalat, in places like Toko, in places like Valencia, and other parts of Trinidad. Because and that's what you took it from. That's the thing. When I look at the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, all I see is local government. I don't see anything for rural development. And let me also say, especially for the benefit of my worthwhile friend from Digo Martin Central who was in local government, and also for Tanapuna, that the budget for local government has been cut, the development budget, by $53 million. $53 million it has been slashed by, which I think is very, very unfortunate. Slashed it by 53 million. Yeah, 53 million it has been slashed by. And I think that is really, really very bad. And also, in terms of your budget for recurrent expenditure, it has been cut by $92.4 million for local government. So while you're talking about expanding local government, and you're talking about doing so much more for local government, in the very first budget which had an opportunity to walk the talk between your policy initiatives and the programs you want to implement, you have failed. There's a diversion. You have cut the budget. You have cut the budget. But one notices very carefully the political strategy that is being employed in local government. When you look at the budget, and when you look at which of the corporations have been cut and which of the corporations have been increased, you will see that what they are seeking to do is strengthen their areas for the local government election, and they are trying to boost the marginals in their favor. That is the political strategy involved in how they are dealing with the cuts and the changes that are taking place in local government. And I warn the population about that, because you are going to be bribed again in a way that you're going to think that you are getting something, but in the end the sting will come in the tail, as we see. So in Chagaramas, we succeeded in giving a unique experience both to domestic tourists and to foreign tourists. And we didn't stop there. We were well on our way in Maracas. In Maracas, we started the project to develop Maracas, the very project that they costed in 2005, 2006, for $33 million. The very project, very scope, is being done for $120 million. Very scope. In that project.
Are they going to stop it? They want to stop it?
We like to know that, whether that project is still on and whether the project is going to continue. But we were doing the things that would have made a difference to tourism. But, you know, the Honourable Minister of Tourism, who is well-intentioned in terms of what she has been saying, I think will really have a challenge on her hands to shift attitudes to service, especially in Tobago, where Tobago needs tourists. And I think that that is something that we were well on our way to shifting and changing by providing the facilities and the kind of training. What we have to do for tourism is not depend on the sea sand experience. We have to give a different experience to the tourism people. Why is it that Trinidad and Tobago cannot be looked at as a recuperation and wellness center for tourists? Why is it we cannot think differently? Why we cannot look at Trinidad and Tobago as a place where people can look as coming for a tourism experience in terms of wellness, in terms of recuperation? Wellness centers, I believe, can be very successful. Because what we'll then be doing is developing a specialist product. A specialist product. Not only will it contribute to bringing in tourists to the country, high-paying tourists, high-end tourists, but it will also contribute to rural development, to sustainable jobs. And in initial stages, will also boost the construction sector. Will also boost the construction sector. One of the fastest growing areas in terms of wellness tourism is Ayurveda. Ayurveda, which is a parallel system of medicine in India and now in Europe, and is now being adopted in Canada and so on. And we have here the makings for that. We also have a chair in Ayurvedic studies at the University of the West Indies. So one has to look at what one has in one's hand and begin to use it for the benefit of the country. In this regard, one hopes that the 500-acre multi-facility tourism resort project in Mayaro, which was approved by the People's Partnership Government, will be carried through, and that Mayaro will benefit from that particular project. Now, I am also heartened by the government's indication to look again at the Streets of the World project of Derek Chin. I saw that in the newspaper. It is unfortunate, in my view, that stumbling blocks have been persistently placed in the pathway of this project, which can make a significant contribution to our service and leisure entertainment sector. You know, we talk about quality service, but, you know, without giving Mr. Chin a free ad, let me say that, you know, the Movie Town experience and the experience of his restaurants, be they Texas de Brazil or Rizzoni, I think it's called, they are first world. They are first world, so we can rise to the standards. And those are the kind of entrepreneurs whom we should encourage. Because I make reference to him if only to confirm that we have the creativity and we have the capability to push our country forward, to create jobs, and to continue to build with success the foundations for a sustainable future. But as I ask again, what is there in the budget to encourage and to motivate and to inspire our entrepreneurs to move in this direction? Madam Speaker, I also make reference to Mr. Chin in the wider context of emphasizing that the private sector must not be stymied in its trust to invest. But the disease of bureaucracy, which we had begun to tackle under the People's Partnership Government by doing things like reducing the number of days it took from months to 3 days to register a company and to get business going. The other changes that were made in the Ministry of Trade with regard to ISCUDA and so on and so forth. ASCUDA. Madam Speaker, the disease of bureaucracy must be addressed once and for all if they want to make a difference. The former Minister of Trade, Mr. Bharat, had set in train a number of initiatives along with Mr. Cadiz when he was minister, aimed at reducing the bureaucracy in terms of the time it took to start up business and to deal with transactions. You know, Madam Speaker, I'm reminded of the story of Gulliver and the Lilliputians. And let me just say that the Gulliver of private sector entrepreneurship, tied down with 1,000 strings by Lilliputian bureaucrats, would never spring up into the boisterous activity required in this moment of our economic history. Never. We need to remove the stranglehold of bureaucracy and have more flexibility in the country. Madam, Madam Speaker, whether the public service and the current government understands it. Bureaucracy and the stranglehold it has must be broken. It's fundamental in achieving the required paradigm. The challenge we have to our success resides in developing a competitive environment and competitive product aimed at a diversified economy is culture. Culture. A cultural shift is needed. Madam Speaker, we have arrived at a particular juncture in our economic history where we must decide what role government wishes to play in the development of the country and how much it wants to get involved. If it does get involved, is it going to be a facilitator or is it going to be an obstructionist? That's the thing. Indeed, there's a matter of what role the government intends to play in the current economic scenario. If job loss is as real as we think it is, what economic philosophy is the government proposing to use so that it can weather the storm and create a financially and socially stable country? You know, if you go back in history, there were similar situations in the United States. Ronald Reagan faced situations like that. And perhaps it's opportune to ask whether a special recovery plan like that which Obama introduced has merit or should be considered in our present circumstance. Madam Speaker, we have used monetary policy, we have used fiscal policy, and we have reduced interest rates, which is more or less part of the monetary policy. Government investment in infrastructure, we have used it, and I think it's necessary. I think it's important, therefore, that the construction sector be made more boisterous, that nothing be done to slow down the pace of the construction sector, because if you slow down the pace of construction, you're going to affect hundreds of thousands of jobs in the country, because not only are you going to affect people directly involved in construction, you're going to affect the suppliers, you're going to affect hardwares, you're going to affect the service sector that supplies to the construction sector, and what have you. Now, a lot of hullabaloo has been made about deficit financing, and they have hullabaloo. It's nice. A lot has been made out about deficit financing and the need to balance the budget. Madam Speaker, yes, we ran deficit budgets. Yes.
5 minutes have expired. You indicated that you intended to take the extended 10 minutes.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to propose that now is a convenient time for lunch. Yes. And therefore, this sitting is now suspended for the lunch break. The sitting will resume at 2:10 p.m.